My oldest daughter's funeral was winding down when my son-in-law walked into the chapel, gripping my youngest daughter's hand. Once most of the guests had filtered out, he walked over to where I was standing by the casket, leaned in close, and whispered right into my ear, "Don't worry, Dad. I'm going to take over her company and run it right. And of course, I'll take real good care of her little sister, too." Right then, a familiar, quiet little laugh came from inside the casket. The entire chapel went dead silent. My son-in-law turned white as a sheet, stumbled backward, and hit the floor hard. Welcome to A Father's Revenge. Before we get into the story, do me a quick favor and drop a comment below. Are you driving, working, or just chilling out right now? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Just a quick heads up. A few details in this story have been tweaked for storytelling purposes, but the real message behind it is what matters most. I never in a million years thought I would outlive my own child. But at 62 years old, on a Thursday in November, I found myself standing inside an upscale Palo Alto funeral home, watching my son-in-law smile at the mourners, like a king who had just inherited a massive empire. The chapel, called Restful Shores, was packed with at least 200 people. Huge arrangements of white calla lilies lined the walls, and the scent was so thick it made my throat feel tight. The morning fog off the San Francisco Bay was pressing hard against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Silicon Valley skyline into a blurry gray ghost in the distance. Right at the front of the room, Claire Vance, my 35-year-old oldest daughter, was lying completely still. She was the brilliant mind behind our family's multi-hundred-million-dollar tech hardware and chip manufacturing business, and now she was resting in a custom casket made of brushed aluminum and carbon fiber. Then there was Julian Thorne, 40. He joined our company 7 years ago as the VP of Venture Capital and M&A, and married Claire a year after that. The Savile Row suit he was wearing cost more than most assembly line engineers make in months. He was working the room with Maya, shaking hands and accepting condolences with this perfectly practiced look on his face that I guess was supposed to pass for heartbreak. Maya Vance, 31. My youngest daughter and the PR director for the family trust. She was wearing a flawless, jet black Prada suit, and her grief looked just as perfectly calculated as her outfit. Her eyes were completely dry. Every couple of minutes she would touch Julian's elbow, guiding him from one group of mourners to the next, like they were navigating a corporate merger negotiation instead of burying her sister. I spent 35 years grinding in Silicon Valley, starting as a guy soldering circuit boards in a garage and working my way up to chairman of a top semiconductor manufacturing firm. I know what real grief looks like. I've seen it on the faces of old engineers when the stress finally breaks them, or when business partners lose everything. Real grief doesn't smile, and it definitely doesn't network. Whatever this was, it wasn't grief. The priest from the Santa Clara parish stood at the podium, reading the eulogy in that practiced, solemn voice he always used. Over the years, I'd seen him host funerals for plenty of Silicon Valley tech giants. Claire Vance lived a life full of purpose, his voice echoed through the quiet room. She was a true daughter of the Bay Area tech world, a leader in our innovation community taken from us far too soon. I stood in the back row watching everything unfold. Victor, my 65-year-old best friend and our company's chief legal counsel, was standing right beside me. He was in his usual sharp three-piece suit, his head of silver hair looking exactly the same as it had for 30 years. He'd been drafting our very first patent applications before Claire was even born. Unlike Julian and Maya, Victor's eyes never left the casket. His jaw was clenched tight, and his hands were gripping the back of the pew in front of us. "They aren't even trying to hide it," Victor murmured under his breath. "Yeah," I replied, "they aren't." That casket was made of carbon fiber. Claire had always been obsessed with how resilient that material was under extreme testing. It could take an unbelievable amount of pressure and come out stronger on the other side. way back when she was 26 and I had just promoted her to COO. She fought everyone in the room to use that material for the core housing of our first-generation commercial server racks. Julian had pushed for a cheaper alloy back then. Claire won. Julian leaned in close to a female tech executive I recognized, putting a hand on her shoulder and speaking in a low, warm tone. Maya was handing a tissue to an older gentleman I didn't know, a soft look of sympathy on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were treating this funeral like the ultimate networking event. Once the service ended, the mourners formed a long line to walk past the casket for one last goodbye. I waited quietly, watching them pass by, whisper their prayers, and touch their fingertips to the cold metal. I watched them hug Julian and Maya, telling them how incredibly sorry they were and how unexpected this tragedy was. It wasn't until most of the crowd started moving toward the reception hall that I finally walked up. Victor stayed back, giving me some space. Julian was standing right there by the casket as I approached. Maya was watching from about 2 feet behind him. Up close, Claire looked peaceful. Her face was calm. Her hands were folded over her chest, and her dark hair was perfectly arranged over her shoulders. She was wearing the deep blue Tom Ford business suit she'd bought for the Global Semiconductor Summit last year. There wasn't a scratch on her. The medical examiner said it was a sudden ruptured brain aneurysm. For a woman that young, it was incredibly sudden, unexplained, and tragic. I placed my hand on the edge of the casket. The metal felt ice cold and smooth. Julian stepped in close, his shoulder almost touching mine. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, meant for nobody but me. "Take it easy, old man," he said. "All the tech patents, the production lines, the real estate Claire left behind, Maya and I are taking over. We'll do a much better job than she ever did." I slowly turned my head to look at him. His expression was soft, almost sympathetic. There wasn't a single hint of shame in his eyes. "A much better job?" I repeated. "Way better," Julian said. And that's exactly when I heard it. Soft, impossible, and completely real. A little laugh. The chuckle came from right inside the casket, low and warm, with a tone that sounded like she knew a secret. It was a laugh I had heard 10,000 times over the last 35 years. It was the exact laugh Claire gave whenever she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The one she used when she just won a patent battle nobody thought she could win, or when she held the cards everyone else was still trying to figure out. Julian flinched back violently, all the color draining from his face in a split second. He slapped his hand over his chest. "You," he stammered. Maya's fingers clamped onto his arm like a vice. "We need to step back," she said, her voice completely tight. She didn't even glance at the casket as she dragged Julian toward the exit without looking back once. I stood there totally frozen, my hand still resting on the smooth metal edge of the casket. Claire's face hadn't changed at all. Calm, still, just like before. But I heard that laugh. I knew that laugh as well as I knew the hum of the ventilation system in the Silicon Valley clean rooms, or the mechanical rhythm of the microchip assembly lines. That was absolutely Claire's laugh. There was no mistaking it, no doubt about it. Julian's face was white as paper. Maya held his arm tightly, steering him right toward the doors. Neither of them looked back. I was left standing by the casket all by myself, the smell of the calla lilies suffocating, and the fog outside still a heavy gray. My hand was still pressed against the solid, cold-sealed metal. That laugh was unmistakable, and it was obviously on purpose, which meant something. If Claire was dead, what did I just hear? And if she wasn't dead, where was she? The last of the mourners left around 4 in the afternoon. I waited until the chapel was completely empty, until the whispering voices of the mourners in the hallways faded away, leaving nothing but the scent of the lilies and the sound of the cold November rain tapping against the windows. The funeral director, Mr. Harrison, a lean man in his 50s with a very professional, sympathetic vibe, quietly stepped in from a side door. He'd handled funerals for half the tech billionaires and old money families in the Bay Area over the last 40 years. "Mr. Vance," he said. "You can stay as long as you need. If you need anything at all, I'll be right in my office." "Thank you," I said. He nodded and left, the double doors clicking softly shut behind him. I was alone with the casket. The chapel was dead silent, except for the rain and the distant hum of the building's heating system. I stepped a bit closer, reaching out to the polished aluminum edge. Up close, Claire looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago. Peaceful, serene, her dark hair neatly styled over her shoulders, her hands crossed over her chest. I touched her hand. It was cold. But it wasn't the deep cold of someone who had been dead for 3 days. It was that unnatural, icy chill left behind by artificial refrigeration, embalming fluid, and funeral home preparation. The skin felt wrong. It was too stiff, too perfect, like wax. I heard that laugh. I knew what I heard. I leaned down to inspect the inside of the casket. The white silk lining was smooth and quilted. My fingers slid along the edge where the fabric met the metal, searching for anything unusual, anything that could explain the voice that had sent Julian running. My hand stopped somewhere near Claire's left shoulder. Right there, underneath the silk, was a tiny bulge. I pressed it gently, feeling a hard, rectangular object about the size of my thumb. Carefully, I worked my fingers into the edge of the fabric and peeled it back. A device. It was a microelectronic plastic casing in black, complete with a tiny speaker grill, and it was still slightly warm to the touch. Someone had planted this here. Someone had triggered it remotely, and the timing was flawless. The exact second Julian whispered about liquidating everything Claire had built. Someone wanted me to hear that laugh. Someone wanted me to know. I held the device in my palm, feeling the residual warmth from its operation. The laugh was pre-recorded. Claire's voice, her distinct inflection captured and embedded into this little piece of tech hidden beneath the casket lining. Either my daughter had orchestrated this whole thing herself, or someone who knew her inside and out had done it. I slipped the device into my coat pocket and turned my attention back to the body. The deep blue suit. I recognized it instantly. It was a custom Tom Ford piece, the exact suit Claire wore when she signed a manufacturing agreement worth over $100 million. She'd bought it 3 years ago to seal a deal with a major Taiwanese semiconductor firm. I was with her when she picked it out, waiting in the boutique while she tried on 6 different cuts before settling on this one. "It's about presents, Dad," she'd said back then, looking at herself in the mirror. "When you walk into a 9-figure negotiation, you have to look like you belong there." She wore it to countless signings, negotiations, and board meetings. It was her armor. I reached for the inside pocket of the suit jacket, just like I'd seen Claire do hundreds of times when checking for her phone or business cards. My fingers brushed against the hidden inner pocket, a piece of paper folded into quarters. I pulled it out carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a heavy cream-colored stationery, the kind Claire always used for personal notes. I unfolded it slowly. Handwritten, deep blue ink. It was Claire's unmistakable handwriting, the sharp angles on the capital C, the slight slant to the right. It was the firm hand of someone who had signed thousands of corporate contracts. 4 sentences, 20 words in total. "The woman in the casket isn't me. Find out who she is, Dad. San Jose Data Center, Cold Storage 4. Tonight, come alone." I read it 3 times, 4 times. The handwriting didn't change. "The woman in the casket isn't me." I looked down at the body. The face was Claire's, or close enough that 200 mourners had walked past without a single doubt. Close enough that I had stood here for 10 minutes, staring right at her, before finding this note. But now, knowing the truth, I could see the differences. The nose was slightly wider, the jawline wasn't quite as sharp, the hands were a fraction larger. Someone had surgically altered or meticulously made up this person to look like my daughter. Someone had dressed her in Claire's clothes, styled her hair the exact same way, and announced to the entire Silicon Valley tech community that Claire Vance, 35, was dead of a sudden aneurysm. And Claire, my real daughter, had left me instructions. San Jose Data Center, Cold Storage 4. I knew the place. Down in the South Bay Industrial District, an area packed with massive server farms and data storage facilities that required extreme liquid cooling. Cold Storage 4 would be a temperature-controlled unit in the main facility. Tonight, come alone. I folded the note and tucked it into my left breast pocket, right against my heart, where Claire knew I always kept the things that mattered. My fingers brushed against the outline of the tiny audio device in my other pocket. If my daughter had engineered all of this, the body double, the funeral, the hidden device, the note, she had handled it with the exact precision of a corporate acquisition. But if someone else had planted these clues, if someone was using Claire's disappearance to manipulate me, then she was in a kind of danger I couldn't even measure yet. Either way, I needed answers. I touched the edge of the casket one last time, looking at the woman who wasn't my daughter. Someone was dead. Someone had been carefully prepared and presented to the world as Claire Vance. Maybe some family out there was looking for her, completely unaware that she was lying in a Palo Alto funeral home under a stolen name. "Who are you?" I whispered. The body didn't answer. There was only the steady tap of the cold rain outside and the distant sound of Mr. Harrison's footsteps echoing down the hall. I walked toward the exit, keeping my hand pressed over the note in my pocket. The November evening was fading into pitch black, and the Pacific fog was rolling in, the kind of weather that turned the industrial parks of Silicon Valley into a maze of shadows and high-pressure sodium lights. Cold Storage 4 at the San Jose Data Center was waiting for me in that darkness. If Claire was alive, she was waiting for me there too. If she wasn't, if someone else had written that note, planted that device, and staged this entire show, then I was walking straight into a trap. I stepped out into the rain-soaked parking lot and pulled out my phone. I made only one call to the one person I trusted blindly. Victor picked up on the second ring. "I need you," I said. "San Jose Data Center tonight. And Victor, bring your notary seal and a forensic camera. We might need to document whatever we find as legal evidence." At 9 o'clock on Friday morning, Victor met me outside Stanford Hospital. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, looking like a man who hadn't slept a wink, just like me. We'd spent hours on a late-night phone call after I left the funeral home. His attorney instincts had kicked in, and he convinced me that before we went anywhere near that San Jose Data Center, we needed to check the official records first. "Before we open any cold storage doors," he said over the phone, "we need to know what the legal paperwork claims actually killed your daughter." So on a cold November morning that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, we stood in the medical examiner's archive room, waiting for the clerk to pull Claire's file. Janet, a tired-looking clerk in her late 50s, had seen enough death certificates to spot an anomaly from a mile away. She brought the folder into a gray conference room under buzzing fluorescent lights, with a view of the hospital's parking structure outside. "This is everything we have on Claire Vance," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "Pronounced dead on November 18th. I remember this case, such a young woman. No visible trauma. The chief medical examiner signed off on it himself." "Thank you," I said. She nodded and left the 2 of us alone. Victor opened the folder. I watched his face as he scanned the pages, watching that tiny muscle in his jaw tighten the exact way it did whenever he found a loophole in a massive patent contract. "Official cause of death, sudden ruptured brain aneurysm," he said. "Signed by Dr. Thomas Sterling, Chief Medical Examiner for Santa Clara County." That name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Thomas Sterling. I knew that name, not from medicine or business circles, but from a deeply personal connection, one that tied straight back to Claire. "I know the Chief Medical Examiner," I said. "He's been in this position for about 8 years, Victor noted, looking up. "Before that, he was a professor at Stanford Med." I put the pieces of the memory together. He was Claire's mentor in college. They stayed friends. She used to have dinner with him and his wife a couple of times a year. He's Claire's godfather. Victor looked up from the file. "Your daughter's death certificate was signed by a close personal friend. That's either incredibly convenient," I said, "or incredibly deliberate." Victor flipped to the next page. The attending text notes mentioned some red flags when the body was brought in, but they were ultimately overridden by Dr. Sterling's directive. Listen to this. Core temperature and progression of rigor mortis indicate a contradiction in the timeline of death. Recommended further pathological review. But Sterling's signature shut it down. No autopsy was performed. Did Claire have any history of vascular issues? Victor asked. Any genetic conditions? None, I said. She ran 5 miles around the bay every single morning, rain or shine. Barely missed a day in 15 years. Blood vessels like hers don't just snap out of nowhere. Victor pulled another sheet from the folder, the intake log from the hospital morgue. He stared at it for a moment, then slid it over to me. Look at the timestamp, he said. I read the entry. Body received, November 18th, 2026 at 23:47. Core body temperature at intake, 34.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Rigor mortis advanced to heavy, stage 3. Delivered by spouse, Julian Thorne. 11:47 at night, I said. Julian reported her time of death as 9 o'clock. What was he doing during those 3 hours? That's not the biggest issue, Victor whispered. Look at the core temperature, 34.2 degrees. I'd spent 35 years in semiconductor hardware manufacturing. I knew what cold did to materials. I knew the temperature standards for liquid-cooled server rooms and industrial freezing facilities. That's industrial refrigeration levels, I said. The attending tech noticed it too. Victor pointed to a handwritten note scribbled in the margin. Body temperature completely inconsistent with reported time of death. Rigor unnaturally accelerated. Recommended deep panel review. But Dr. Sterling pushed it through anyway. Signed off within an hour of intake. Victor confirmed my suspicions. No autopsy, no extra testing. Cause of death, ruptured aneurysm. They just shut the case right then and there. I leaned back in the plastic chair, the overhead lights buzzing above us. Claire had supposedly died at home on November 18th at 9 o'clock at night. Julian didn't get her body to Stanford Hospital until nearly 3 hours later, and when she arrived, she was already freezing. It wasn't the natural cold of death either. It was the chill of industrial refrigeration. She was already in deep rigor mortis. She was kept somewhere, I said. Between 9 o'clock and midnight, she was in a place with extreme temperature control, somewhere with the capacity to hide a body. That narrows it down a lot, Victor added. Cold storage units, industrial freezers, medical freezing facilities. The San Jose data center, I said. Victor nodded slowly. The note you found said cold storage 4, a liquid cooling room for servers. The real question is whose body was stored there. I said, if the body delivered to Stanford Hospital was already refrigerated and in heavy rigor mortis, then Claire, or rather this woman, was dead hours before Julian ever reported it, and someone had the access to use a cold storage facility to keep her. Victor closed the folder carefully. If she wasn't at Stanford Hospital between 9 and midnight on the 18th, where was she? I thought about Claire's note folded up in my breast pocket. San Jose Data Center, Cold Storage 4. I thought about the body double in that custom casket, the audio device hidden under the silk, and the meticulously planned funeral. We've been asking the wrong question this whole time, I said. What do you mean? We've been asking if Claire is alive or dead, I said. But the medical evidence proves that someone definitely died. Someone was refrigerated and delivered to Stanford Hospital on November 18th. The person lying in that casket in Palo Alto right now is that exact person. So the real question is, whose body did Julian actually bring in? I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. Because if that isn't Claire, then where on earth is my daughter? And whose body are we supposed to cremate tomorrow? Victor looked at me across the sterile conference table, the manila folder sitting between us like a piece of evidence in a trial neither of us was ready for. The San Jose Data Center, he said flatly. This afternoon. This afternoon, I agreed. We left the hospital and stepped out into the thick November fog rolling off the Pacific. It turned the Silicon Valley tech parks into a maze of gray silhouettes and distant noises. Somewhere in that fog, in an industrial park filled with buzzing servers and liquid cooling systems, Cold Storage 4 was waiting for us. If Claire was alive, and if she had engineered this entire deception to leave me clues to follow, then she was waiting for me there too. If she wasn't, if someone else had forged all of this, then I was about to find out just how deep this conspiracy against my daughter went. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Victor and I drove into the massive data center campus in the South Bay Industrial District of San Jose, an area dominated by shipping containers, endless exhaust fans, and thick fog. The address on the note guided us through chain-link fences and into a maze of giant cooling towers and climate-controlled buildings. Out here, nobody asked questions about what kind of data was being stored or what kind of extreme cooling it required. The main security office was a square concrete building with cameras pointed at the gates. We used my company's top-tier clearance badge to pass through without any interrogation, following the numbers deeper into the facility. Rows of identical heavy steel doors disappeared into the fog, each stenciled with a number. Unit 4 was in the back row, squeezed between an empty space and a unit bearing the logo of a cloud computing subcontractor. I parked the car and killed the engine. Through the windshield, the fog swirled around the high-pressure sodium lights that had already flickered on. The temperature had dropped even more since we left the hospital. When I opened the car door, my breath fogged up instantly in the air. As we approached Cold Storage 4, Victor pulled a high-end forensic camera out of his briefcase. The door was industrial-grade, heavy steel, secured with a thick combination padlock that looked a lot newer than the rusty frame around it. "Before we open it," Victor said, raising the camera, "I'm documenting everything. If what's inside is what I think it is, the FBI is going to need a clean chain of custody." He took photos of the lock, the door, the unit number, and the surrounding area. The flash cut through the heavy fog over and over again. I waited, hands stuffed in my coat pockets, feeling the weight of the small brass key I'd found tucked away with the note. "Ready when you are?" Victor said. I stepped up and slid the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, well-oiled, and obviously maintained recently. The lock popped open with a heavy click. "Claire left this for me," I said. "Whatever is inside, she wanted me to find it." I took the lock off and pulled the heavy handle. The door swung outward on its well-maintained hinges. A wall of bone-chilling cold hit us instantly. It wasn't the winter chill of November. It was the extreme cold of industrial liquid cooling, the kind used to keep supercomputer arrays below zero. It had to be 10 below, maybe colder. The rushing air carried the sharp chemical sting of embalming fluid, mixed with the metallic scent of cooling coils. Victor fumbled for the light switch. The overhead fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a space about 10 by 12 feet. The metal walls were bare and coated in frost, and right in the center of the unit, resting on an aluminum platform, was a body. A young man. He was laid out flat, dressed in a sharp dark suit and white shirt, just like the woman in Claire's casket, with his hands crossed over his chest. His face was peaceful, eyes closed, his skin pale from the cold and death. It was an incredibly professional job of embalming and presentation. "My God," I whispered. Victor stepped inside, his camera flashing as he documented every single detail. The light bounced off the frosted walls. I forced myself to step closer, to get a good look at the young man's face. I recognized him, not well, and we didn't have a personal relationship, but I had seen him in the hallways at Vance Tech, passed him in the break room, and signed his name on the payroll. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and carefully lifted the employee badge clipped to his suit jacket. The laminated card confirmed what I already knew. Marcus Reed, employee number 3847, Network Security and Compliance Audit. Vance Tech, 28 years old, missing for 3 weeks. Nobody had filed a police report because Julian told everyone that Marcus had gone on an extended silent tech retreat deep in the mountains of Northern California to find inspiration. We all bought the lie because in Silicon Valley that kind of thing happens all the time. "Arthur," Victor's voice was cautious, "you know him?" "Marcus Reed," I said. "He worked in our security audit department. Hired him about 18 months ago. straight out of MIT with a master's in cybersecurity. Brilliant kid, incredibly thorough. Claire loved him because he actually went digging through the underlying code for vulnerabilities, instead of just glancing at surface-level audit reports. When did he go missing? 3 weeks ago, late October. I let the badge drop back onto Marcus's chest. Julian said he went off the grid for a silent tech retreat. Victor was already photographing a metal shelf mounted on the far wall. There's an envelope here, addressed to you. I turned around. It was a manila envelope, with a single word written across the front in deep blue ink. Dad. I recognized Claire's handwriting immediately. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was an encrypted solid-state flash drive and 3 photographs. They were taken with a professional-grade telephoto lens, and the timestamp showed October 30th. The first photo showed Marcus Reed sitting at an outdoor table at an upscale restaurant in Silicon Valley called the Sand Hill Road Venture Clubhouse. Sitting across from him were Julian Thorne and Maya Vance. Several documents were spread out on the table. Julian was reaching for something Marcus was holding. In the second photo, Maya was looking at her phone while Julian and Marcus talked. Marcus looked incredibly serious. Julian looked warm and approachable, the exact way he looked when he was about to close a successful venture capital deal. The third photo showed Marcus standing up from the table, holding the documents. Julian's expression had completely changed. The friendliness was gone, replaced by something incredibly cold and rigid. Victor photographed every single picture from behind me. October 30th, that's 3 weeks before Claire's funeral, and a week before Marcus went missing. He was meeting with them, Victor mused, and in a highly sensitive spot outside the office. Whatever he found in our security compliance files, I said, every word heavy, he confronted them with it, and they killed him for it. I looked back at Marcus's body on the aluminum platform. A young auditor, murdered by Julian and Maya just for being too good at his job, for finding a fatal vulnerability in our chip supply chain contracts, our cryptocurrency accounts, or our regulatory filings, and trying to do the right thing by reporting it up the chain. Then they used his body as a double for Claire. They had him surgically altered, dressed him in Claire's suit, put him through the same meticulous embalming process, and sent him to Stanford Hospital under a stolen identity. Dr. Thomas Sterling signed the death certificate without a single question, and Marcus Reed was placed in a casket as Claire Vance. But Claire knew. She documented the whole thing and left the evidence for me to find. This isn't just financial fraud, I said, my voice sounding completely foreign even to me. This is murder. Victor already had his phone out, his fingers flying across the screen. I'm contacting the FBI. This has officially gone way past local law enforcement. Interstate commercial crimes, semiconductor export controls, and murder tied to corporate fraud. I held the photographs, staring down at Marcus's serious, youthful face. He had tried to expose something, a secret so massive that someone thought it was worth murdering a 28-year-old cybersecurity expert to cover it up. What was that secret? The answer was sitting right in my palm inside that flash drive. Whatever evidence Marcus had gathered, whatever documents he had confronted Julian and Maya with during that meeting, Claire had managed to get her hands on all of it, and now she had passed it on to me. By 7 o'clock that evening, Victor and I were inside his office on the 22nd floor. The flash drive was sitting on the desk, alongside a pot of coffee neither of us had touched, and the kind of heavy, dead silence that comes right before you discover a horrific truth you can never unsee. Victor's law firm occupied a corner suite in a downtown skyscraper, offering a sweeping view of the lights flickering across the San Francisco Bay and Silicon Valley. Through the glass, I could see the steady streams of traffic on the freeway, headlights cutting through the November darkness. I'd spent most of my life here. Tonight, the city felt like a total stranger. Victor plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop. 3 folders popped up on the screen. Emails, financial records, audio. Which one first? He asked. Let's see what they were saying to each other, I replied. He clicked the folder open, revealing dozens of files arranged by date. The earliest went back to March 15th, and the most recent was from November 17th, the exact day before Claire was reported dead. Victor opened the file from March. It was an email exchange between Julian's private account and an address I didn't recognize. But the signature at the bottom was just a single letter, M. Maya, Victor read out loud. Once C is taken care of, Phase 2 begins. A will be easy to manage. The old man trusts everyone. 3 months max, and we liquidate all patent assets and disappear. C is Claire. My voice came out completely flat. And A is me, Arthur. They've been planning this since March, Victor said, his eyes scanning the text. 8 months ago. He kept clicking through more emails. The language was carefully coded, but the intent was crystal clear. There were mentions of removing obstacles, discussions on asset division, and instructions for setting up offshore crypto wallets. In June, there were emails confirming that Marcus Reed was asking too many questions about security compliance. In July, they officially agreed that Marcus needed to be permanently handled. I thought about Marcus's body sitting in cold storage 4, 28 years old, murdered just for doing his job too well. Victor opened the financial folder and spreadsheets filled the screen. There were wire transfers, crypto wallet statements, and transaction logs. He scrolled through them quickly, his sharp lawyer's eyes catching patterns I would have missed completely. $4.5 million, he finally said. From March to October, 70 separate transactions, none of them over $100,000. The amounts were just small enough to avoid triggering the automated financial compliance alerts in the Vance Tech system. The funds came from 6 different corporate accounts. Victor highlighted the entries on screen. Operating capital, payroll reserves, client escrows, equipment maintenance. They scattered the losses across the entire corporate structure. 3 receiving accounts, all in the Cayman Islands, all registered under shell companies, and all converted into untraceable Bitcoin immediately after. $4.5 million, more than most assembly line engineers make in a lifetime, stolen bit by bit in increments small enough to keep even our CFO completely in the dark. Claire found out, I said. That's why she hired Marcus. She suspected something was wrong, so she brought in fresh cybersecurity blood from the outside. And once Marcus confirmed it, they killed him. Victor finished my sentence. He closed the spreadsheets and moved the cursor to the audio folder. There were 5 files, each stamped with a date. The earliest was from September, and the most recent was November 10th. Victor clicked the September file. Static hissed through the speakers for a brief moment before voices appeared. It was clearly a phone recording, and Julian's voice came through sharp and clear. The only wild card left is him. Once the old man is gone, we control everything. The company, the core patents, Claire's trust. Another voice answered him, a woman's voice. The sound of it made my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. Make it look natural, she said. A heart attack, a stroke, an accident. He's 62. Nobody questions a natural death for an old guy. The plan with the high-end whiskey works, Julian replied, as a gift from a grateful client. He'll never suspect a thing. How long will it take? Dr. Sterling says 2 weeks if the dosage is right. A gradual decline. Looks exactly like organ failure from aging. Do you trust the medical examiner? He signed Claire's death certificate without a single question, Julian said. He'll do the exact same thing for Arthur. I knew that woman's voice. I'd heard her ask for bedtime stories when she was 8, ask to borrow the car keys when she was 16, and give a toast at her sister's wedding that brought everyone to tears. Maya, my youngest daughter, was talking about murdering me with the same cold detachment she'd used to order office supplies. That's Maya, I said, even though Victor had already guessed it. That's her voice. Victor paused the playback. His hand was shaking slightly against the mouse. Arthur, play the rest of them, I commanded. He clicked the file from November 10th. The same voices, a different conversation. Dr. Sterling confirmed the aconite is completely undetectable in the whiskey, Maya said. The bitterness blends perfectly with the Macallan. Arthur drinks 2 fingers every single night before bed. 6 weeks, Max, and he's gone. And then the empire's ours, Julian added. Everything is ours, Maya corrected him. The business, the real estate, The manufacturing contracts? Claire's trust transfers entirely to me as the sole surviving sibling. Arthur's estate splits to you as executor and me as next of kin. Within 3 months of his funeral, we sell off the patents and disappear. What about Victor, the old lawyer? Maya let out a cold laugh. He'll be handling the paperwork like he always does. By the time he figures out something is wrong, we'll be billionaires living in Switzerland. Victor shut down the recording. Dead silence fell over the office again, broken only by the hum of the laptop fan and the distant traffic 22 floors below. A multi-hundred-million-dollar empire. They had treated our entire family legacy, 2 generations of hard work, my life and Claire's life, as nothing more than a payout. I have to call the FBI right now, Victor said quietly. This is attempted murder, conspiracy, interstate wire fraud, and money laundering. This is a massive federal case. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The call was picked up almost instantly. Agent Rostova, Victor said into the receiver. This is Victor. I'm calling about a federal case. Murder, conspiracy, embezzlement involving a top semiconductor firm in Silicon Valley. I am with the victim right now. We have audio evidence and financial documentation. A pause as he listened to the other end. Yes, tonight. As soon as possible. Another pause. Arthur Vance. His daughter was murdered 3 weeks ago and her body was swapped out. The conspirators are his son-in-law and his youngest daughter. They are planning to kill him next. He gave the office address and hung up the phone. She's heading over right now, Victor told me. Special Agent Elena Rostova, FBI Cybercrimes and Financial Fraud Division. She wants to see everything. I sat back in the leather chair across from Victor's desk, staring out at the lights of the Bay Area. Somewhere out there in that city, Julian and Maya were probably having dinner or watching TV or sleeping soundly, completely confident that their plan was flawless. Completely confident that Claire was dead, Marcus was forgotten, and I was next. They had been planning this for 8 months. From spring through autumn, during every single Sunday family dinner, every board meeting, and every casual conversation, they were plotting how to steal everything I had built and kill me to cover their tracks. And I had seen absolutely none of it, believing every lie, trusting my own flesh and blood to the point of blindness. Agent Rostova arrived at Victor's office just after midnight. We spent 3 hours walking her through every single detail, the flash drive, the photographs, and Marcus Reed's body still sitting in that cold storage unit. She took thorough notes, asked incredibly sharp questions, and made no promises other than that they needed time to build an airtight case for indictment. By 3 a.m, I was back at my private estate along the coast in Carmel. I didn't sleep. I just watched the Pacific waves crash against the shore until the gray light of dawn finally broke over the water. That bottle of scotch was still sitting on my kitchen counter, right where it had been since Thursday afternoon. A Macallan 25 years sherry oak. The label alone was worth framing. This was a bottle that cost more than most entry-level engineers make in a month, retailing for well over $5,000. The kind of alcohol you give to someone you want to impress, or someone you want to kill. The condolence card was tucked under the bottom of the bottle, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock in Julian's neat handwriting, to a grieving father, hoping this helps you get through the difficult days ahead. On Saturday morning, I stood in my kitchen as the morning Pacific sun cut through the windows, staring at that amber liquid. Julian's voice from the audio recordings echoed in my mind. The plan with the high-end whiskey works. As a gift from a grateful client, he'll never suspect a thing. Then Maya's chilling response followed. Make it look natural. A heart attack, a stroke. He's 62. Nobody questions a natural death for an old guy. The scotch had been delivered while I was at Claire's funeral. Julian had probably walked right into my estate with that exact same sympathetic look he wore at the funeral home, making all the security guards and household staff believe he was just a dutiful son-in-law bringing comfort to a grieving father. I used the dish towel to carefully pick up the bottle, making sure not to leave any new fingerprints on the glass. On the windowsill right above the sink sat one of Claire's prized Japanese bonsai trees. She had given it to me 2 years ago for my 60th birthday. It had a resilient root system and bright green needles, the kind of plant that could survive just about anything. Through occasional waterings and semi-neglect, I had kept it alive for 2 years. You know, Claire always said you were tough to kill, I said to the bonsai. Let's put that to the test. I twisted off the seal of the scotch. It opened with a crisp, satisfying pop. The rich aroma of a 25-year aging process released into the morning air of my kitchen. It smelled of oak and caramel, but underneath all of that, there was something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. A faint underlying bitterness. I poured the entire bottle directly into the soil of the bonsai. $5,000 worth of top-shelf scotch, soaked into the potting mix and roots. The dirt turned dark and saturated, and the amber liquid pooled across the windowsill. If I was wrong, I just destroyed evidence and wasted a ridiculously expensive bottle of whiskey. If I was right, I had just saved my own life. I set the empty bottle back on the counter and pulled out my phone to call Victor. He answered on the very first ring. "Arthur, are you okay? I need you to come out to the estate," I said. "Bring a soil sampling kit and the contact info for the fastest, most discreet toxicology lab you know in this business. Not official, private, and fast." "The whiskey," Victor caught on instantly. "Yeah," I confirmed, "the whiskey." He arrived in less than an hour, carrying a leather bag that looked like it had been borrowed from a CSI unit. Maybe it was. Victor had handled enough corporate espionage and poisoning cases to have deep connections in forensic analysis. He took photos of the bottle, the card, the bonsai tree, and the amber-stained soil, using tweezers to pull soil samples into sterile containers, and labeling everything with the same methodical precision he used for corporate mergers. "Don't touch it directly under any circumstances," he said as he sealed the samples. "If you're right, this is the smoking gun. Chain of custody matters. How long will the Berkeley lab take?" "I know a private lab in Oakland," Victor said. "They specialize in rush jobs for criminal defense attorneys. $5,000 expediting fee, 36 hours. "Have them do it," I said. On Monday afternoon, Victor called me from his office. "The lab just sent over the results," he said, skipping any greeting. "Aconite, incredibly high concentration. There were several lethal doses per kilogram of extract." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the California sun was bright and blinding. The waves were crashing against the rocks, normal life continuing all around me, while Victor explained to me just how close I had come to dying. "If I had drank it, how long would I have had?" I asked. 72 hours, Victor said. "Maybe less, depending on the dosage and your weight. The lab said that concentration would have taken you out in a single glass. It would present as sudden cardiac arrest, arrhythmia, chest pain, respiratory failure, unless someone specifically ran a toxicology panel looking for aconite alkaloids. No standard autopsy would have caught it. And they definitely wouldn't have checked," I said, "because I'm 62 and I just buried my daughter. A heart attack is exactly what everyone would expect." "That's exactly what Julian was banking on," Victor confirmed. I looked over at the bonsai tree on the windowsill. The tips of its resilient needles were already starting to turn yellow and wither, curling in like tiny closed fists. Even the toughest plant couldn't withstand a toxin that deadly. A single glass, 72 hours, no questions asked. "Agent Rostova needs to see this," Victor said. "The bottle, the card, the toxicology report. This is attempted murder with physical evidence. Let's get the report over to her. I'm going to take a picture of this bonsai every single day," I said, "to document its decline. Arthur, are you safe out there? If Julian realizes the whiskey didn't work—" "He doesn't know I didn't drink it," I said. "As far as he's concerned, I accepted his condolence gift like a grateful old fool. He's probably just waiting for the phone call saying I had a sudden heart attack. If that's the case, you've become a much more dangerous liability to him," Victor said. "You're a wild card that's still breathing." "Then we need to move fast," I said. "How much more time does Agent Rostova need?" "She says she needs 1 to 2 weeks. Building a federal case takes time." "Tell her she has 5 days," I said. "Because I can only pretend I don't know my son-in-law is trying to poison me for 5 days max." I hung up the phone and stood by the kitchen window, looking out over the bay. The needles of the bonsai tree were completely brown now, its branches drooping, a calculated warning left behind, poisoned by the very hands that tried to eliminate me. They thought they had withered my world, but they only cleared the soil for what's coming. Julian had been to my estate, stood in this kitchen, perhaps even looked out at this exact view, calculating exactly how much sympathy and how expensive a whiskey it would take to trick a grieving old man into drinking poison. He had written that card in his neat handwriting, to a grieving father, wrapping murder in mourning and delivering it by hand. The plant was practically dead. I had come within an inch of joining it. That same Saturday, after Victor left with the soil samples, I stayed by the window, watching Claire's bonsai die. The leaves turned browner by the hour, curling inward as the toxin traveled up the roots. Victor took the samples to his contact in Oakland, and 36 hours later, we had our answer. Around noon, my phone rang. Maya. I stared at her name on the screen, her voice from the recording looping in my head. Make it look natural. He's 62. Nobody questions a natural death for an old guy. I picked up the call. Maya. Dad. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. I need to talk to you in private. There's something about Julian you should know. What is it? It's not safe to talk over the phone, she said. Can we meet at that Blue Bottle Coffee right next to Stanford? The one Claire used to love. This afternoon at 2. The one Claire used to love. A completely flawless detail. An incredibly precise calculation. I'll be there, I said. The second-floor patio of that coffee shop overlooked the campus and the busy street below. A November wind was blowing, making it cold enough that the outdoor seating area was completely empty. I arrived 10 minutes early and found a spot inside by the window where I could see both the entrance and the layout outside. Maya showed up at 2 sharp, wearing a black cashmere coat that probably cost more than that rare bonsai tree. Her jewelry was minimal, her hair tied back in a simple bun, a perfect portrait of deeply repressed grief. She spotted me, gave a sad smile, and walked through the tables toward me. Dad. She leaned down and kissed my cheek. Her perfume was faint but incredibly luxurious. Thanks for coming. You said it was important, I said. She sat in the chair across from me. A server came by immediately, and she ordered 2 coffees. We fell into silence until the drinks arrived. 2 black coffees, no sugar for either of us. Some habits don't change, even when the world is collapsing. Maya held her coffee cup in both hands, but she didn't take a sip. I'm worried about Julian, she said. The way he's been acting since Claire passed, it's not right. How so? It's reckless, she said. He's making unilateral decisions about the company's core assets, decisions Claire never would have approved. Moving funds around, talking about selling off patents and liquidation plans. These are things that should have waited until we all had time to breathe and process our grief. I watched her face as she spoke. Concerned, deeply troubled, a dutiful youngest daughter, deeply worried about her brother-in-law's poor judgment. What kind of liquidation plans? I asked. I don't know all the details, Maya said. He keeps the financial discussions away from me, but I overheard him talking on the phone about offshore accounts and accelerated timelines. Dad, I think he's trying to take advantage of Claire's absence to make a quick buck. She said Claire's absence, not death, not passing, as if Claire had just gone away on a business trip. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because we're family, Maya said, her voice filled with absolute sincerity, her eyes wide. I know you and I have never been incredibly close. I know Claire was always your favorite, the one you trusted to hand over the entire tech empire to. But she's gone now, and we need to protect what she built from people who want to tear it apart for a paycheck. People who want to tear it apart for a paycheck. She was talking about Julian. She was positioning herself as the responsible one, an ally I could trust. Her hand holding the coffee cup was steady as a rock. 30 years of watching executives negotiate in the business world had taught me one thing. Guilty people tremble when they lie, but cold-blooded planners don't show a single shake. What exactly are you proposing, Maya? An alliance, she said simply. At the board level, you and I vote together. I'll keep you informed on whatever Julian is planning. mutual protection. Together, we make sure the company stays in the hands of real family. Real family, not an outsider who married his way in 7 years ago. The hidden agenda was finally out. Drive a wedge between Julian and me. Position herself as the trustworthy daughter. No matter which side I leaned towards, she would control the final outcome. Julian is family too, I said gently. He was Claire's husband. Keyword being was, Maya repeated precisely, and right now he's acting like he owns everything Claire built. Dad, Claire would want us to work together. She always said business is business, and family has to stick together. The tone she used when she said Claire's name sounded like she was reading from a PR script. It had no weight. There was no pause for the grief that should have been there. It was just a clinical, mechanical recitation of facts. Okay, Claire said this. Claire believed that. Claire would want. I stirred my coffee, watching the students walk along the street outside, counting to 5 before I spoke. I appreciate you coming to me with this, I said, but I need some time to think about it. It's only been 2 days since Claire's funeral. Everything is so sudden and the wound is still bleeding. Of course, Maya said immediately. I completely understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and you're not alone in this. No matter what happens with the company, no matter what Julian does, I'm on your side. She reached out, placing her hand over mine across the table. Her skin was warm and smooth, not a single tremor. Throughout the entire conversation, her voice hadn't cracked once at the mention of Claire's name. Her hand hadn't shaken, and her eyes hadn't gotten red. She was performing grief, like reciting lines she had memorized backward and forward, but never actually felt. Think about what I said. Maya pulled her hand back. Call me when you're ready to talk strategy. We can protect Claire's legacy, Dad, but we have to do it together. She left without taking a single sip of her coffee, dropping enough cash on the table to cover both of our drinks before standing up. Every movement was exactly as it had always been, controlled, calculated, and perfectly measured, without a single wasted gesture. I should get going, she said. I have a 4 o'clock meeting with the accountants, handling some estate matters. She leaned down and kissed my cheek again. I love you, Dad. We'll get through this. I watched her walk toward the exit of the coffee shop, navigating between the tables and chairs, without touching a single one, before disappearing down the stairs leading to the underground parking garage. It was the exact same stride she'd had when she was 8, when she was 16, and when she walked down the aisle at her sister's wedding. There was no trace of grief weighing her down, no slowing of her step from losing someone close. When she mentioned Claire's name, it was like she was reading off a balance sheet. Sibling equals asset equals problem solved. There hadn't been a single crack in her voice. No moments left for memories. Just a completely detached statement about someone who was no longer here. I'd been wrong about who the more dangerous one was. Julian was greedy and cold. I'd heard the sheer cruelty in his voice on the recordings. But Maya was something far more terrifying. She was bone-chillingly cold down to her core. She had sat across from me for 30 whole minutes, playing the part of a concerned daughter and trying to manipulate me into an alliance she never intended to keep, just to test if I had any suspicion about the poison in my kitchen, the body in the cold storage, or the flash drive containing 8 months of evidence against her. She talked about Claire like an equation that had already been solved, not her own sister. I called Agent Rostova from the coffee shop parking lot, right as Maya's car was pulling onto University Avenue. She said, Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, FBI San Francisco field office. At exactly 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, Victor and I walked through the entrance of the federal building. We were carrying a briefcase packed with 3 days of ironclad evidence and the incredibly heavy certainty that comes with accusing your own flesh and blood of murder. The FBI field office was all cold concrete and harsh fluorescent lights. We handed over our phones and signed for our visitor badges. A young agent escorted us up to a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor. Special Agent Elena Rostova was already waiting at the metal table. She was in her late 40s, her dark hair pulled back tight, carrying the kind of intensely professional focus that forced you to weigh every single word. She stood up when we walked in, shaking hands with both of us. Mr. Vance, Mr. Victor, she nodded to each of us. Please sit down. A recording device sat right in the middle of the table. She pressed the button stating the date, time, and names for the record. Start from the beginning and walk me through the case, she said. My oldest daughter's funeral was on Thursday, I said, and by Friday afternoon we discovered a murdered man had been put in her place. Victor opened the briefcase, laying the items out across the table in chronological order. Marcus Reed's keycard, the photos of the body in the cold storage unit, the flash drive Claire had left behind. Marcus Reed, 28, a security compliance auditor at Vance Tech, Victor said, reported on a leave of absence for personal reasons 3 weeks ago, but actually murdered and refrigerated until his body was used to substitute for Claire Vance at Stanford Hospital. Agent Rostova examined the badge without touching it, taking detailed notes. Victor continued, This flash drive contains 8 months of evidence. Email exchanges between Julian Thorne and Maya Vance about liquidating assets and removing obstacles. Logs of wire transfers totaling over $4.5 million to offshore crypto accounts. Audio recordings of Julian and Maya planning the murder of Arthur. Attempted murder, I corrected her. I'm still breathing. Victor placed the toxicology report on the table. Aconite poisoning delivered via a high-end bottle of scotch, left at Arthur's estate during the funeral on Thursday afternoon. A single glass would have been lethal. Agent Rostova read through the report carefully. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. How did you test it? She asked. Poured it into a plant, I said. The plant died. A private lab confirmed the poison. The bottle is still at my estate. It will have Julian's fingerprints on it, and the condolence card is in his handwriting. Victor laid out the final pieces of the puzzle. The hospital records showing the anomaly in the body's temperature, the photos of Marcus meeting Julian and Maya 4 weeks ago, the death certificate signed by Dr. Thomas Sterling, a close personal friend of Claire's, the paper trail of $4.5 million wired and laundered, 1 dead security auditor, 1 lethal bottle of poison. Every single piece fit together perfectly, like the pins on a microchip. Agent Rostova spent 20 minutes reviewing all the materials. She asked clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and locations, photographed the evidence, and took notes in incredibly neat handwriting. Finally, she set her pen down. The federal charges are completely viable, she said. Premeditated first-degree murder for Marcus Reed, executed to cover up wire and financial fraud. Attempted murder via poisoning against you, Mr. Vance. The offshore transfers constitute wire fraud and money laundering. These are massive federal offenses. What happens next? Victor asked. I'm preparing arrest warrants for Julian Thorne and Maya Vance, Agent Rostova said, presenting the evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office, coordinating with San Jose PD 48 hours, maybe less. They're looking at life sentences, federal prison, no parole. I thought about Julian's face, smiling at the mourners at the funeral. I thought about Maya's incredibly steady hands at the coffee shop yesterday. 2 days from now, they would be in handcuffs. Mr. Vance, Agent Rostova's tone shifted, becoming direct. I have to ask you a question. I waited. Where's your daughter right now? It was the one question I had been deliberately avoiding ever since I found that note in the casket. I don't know, I said, and that was the truth. I didn't know if Claire was in the Bay Area, another state, or overseas. I didn't know if she was watching me from the shadows or waiting for a signal. I knew absolutely nothing beyond the fact that she had left me a trail of breadcrumbs to follow. Do you believe Claire Vance is alive? Agent Rostova asked. Victor shifted uncomfortably beside me. The recording device gave off a faint, low hum. Yes, I said, I do. Agent Rostova made a notation in her book. Why? Because she left me instructions, I said. The audio device in the casket, the note directing me to the San Jose data center, the flash drive packed with 8 months of evidence she gathered. She engineered all of this, down to the last detail, including faking her own death, Agent Rostova remarked. Yes. Do you know how she pulled it off? Dr. Sterling signed the death certificate, I said. He was her friend, and more importantly, her godfather. I'm guessing he helped her. Have you had any contact with your daughter since she was reported dead? No, I said. No direct contact. The clues have all been indirect. She's sending messages, but I haven't seen her and I haven't spoken to her. Agent Rostova closed her notebook, looking at me with a professional neutrality that hid an active assessment. She believed Claire was alive. I could tell from the way she framed her questions. The FBI wasn't just investigating Julian and Maya's conspiracy. They were investigating my daughter's disappearance, and whether I knew a lot more than I was letting on. Thank you for bringing this evidence in, Agent Rostova said. I need to retain all the physical evidence for processing. You'll receive copies for your records. When are you going to make the arrest? I asked. As soon as the warrants are signed, she said. I'll call you before we execute. For your own safety, I suggest you stay somewhere Julian and Maya don't know about. If they suspect you've turned on them, you could be in immediate danger. By noon, Victor and I left the federal building, standing on the San Francisco street, feeling the November chill as we watched the crowded traffic pass by. She thinks you helped Claire, Victor whispered. I know, I said. Did you? No, I said. Juan, but I'm starting to think Claire might be a lot closer to us than any of us realize. Agent Rostova believed my daughter was alive. So did I. The question now was whether she would show herself before Julian, and Maya realized their meticulously planned murders had failed, and whether I would live long enough to see it happen. By Sunday afternoon, I was back at my estate in Carmel, staring out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the familiar coastline. Agent Rostova had told me to find somewhere Julian and Maya didn't know about. But this was my home. Leaving felt like giving up. Around 5 in the evening, just as the November twilight was turning the bay into a heavy lead gray, Agent Rostova called. Mr. Vance, she said, I have the official confirmation report on the body from the San Jose data center. I walked away from the window and sat down at the kitchen table. The dead bonsai tree was still sitting on the windowsill, its brown leaves curled tight. Go ahead, I said. Marcus Paul Reed, 28, employed in your security audit department since April of 2025. Dental records have confirmed the identification. The coroner estimates the time of death between October 30th and November 2nd, which matches when he went missing. Who filed the report? I asked. His landlord, Agent Rostova said, on November 1st, because he missed his rent payment. But according to your corporate records, Julian Thorne notified staff on October 31st that Marcus had taken emergency leave due to a sudden family issue back home in Oregon to go on a mountain retreat. We all believed it, I said. Nobody questioned it. That's how these things usually go, Mr. Vance, Agent Rostova noted. Nobody questions a lie that sounds reasonable. Marcus's co-workers assumed he'd be back. His landlord assumed he skipped out on rent and moved away. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, he'd been dead for 3 weeks. I thought about Marcus's desk inside the Vance Tech building, right on the 3rd floor near the window overlooking the parking lot. I'd walked past it hundreds of times over the last 3 weeks. I'd never once stopped to think about where the young man who worked there had gone. What about his family? I asked. There are no immediate survivors, Agent Rostova said. His parents died in a car crash when he was 22. No siblings. His emergency contact was a college roommate in Portland, and they hadn't spoken in 6 months. There's no family to notify, no parents waiting for a phone call that will never go through, no brother or sister wondering why he went radio silent, just a landlord wondering why the rent check didn't arrive, and an empty desk at the office that nobody pays attention to. He was completely on his own when he died, I said. Yes, Agent Rostova said softly. He died very much alone. Outside, the Pacific waves kept crashing against the shore, completely indifferent to the tragedy of a dead auditor, a missing person nobody knew was gone. The world just keeps spinning when people vanish into thin air. There's more, Agent Rostova continued. On October 28th, Marcus contacted a whistleblower protection attorney who specializes in corporate-level financial fraud. He told them he had proof of systemic embezzlement and money laundering at Vance Tech, and he wanted to meet to discuss protection measures before officially filing. October 28th. the exact same week Claire took those photos of him meeting with Julian and Maya at the restaurant. He was trying to do this the right way, through the legal channels, I said. Yes, Agent Rostova confirmed. He scheduled an in-person meeting with the firm for November 3rd, but he never made it to the appointment. The law firm called him twice and left voicemails. When he didn't reply, they just assumed he had changed his mind. A young whistleblower getting cold feet and backing out. It happens all the time. And Julian set up that meeting 2 days after Marcus contacted the attorney, I said. October 30th, Agent Rostova said. The photos on Claire's flash drive put Marcus, Julian, and Maya at that Sand Hill Road restaurant between roughly 6 and 7 in the evening. We believe that's the moment Julian found out Marcus had hired a lawyer and had the evidence. That meeting was called to shut him up permanently. October 30th to November 1st. 3 days to kill a man and hide him inside a liquid-cooled storage unit. How did they do it? I asked. The coroner found aconite in the tissue samples, Agent Rostova said. The exact same toxin from the whiskey. We believe Julian poisoned Marcus during that meeting, likely slipping it into his drink, where the alcohol easily masked the bitter taste. Marcus would have gone home, felt sick, and deteriorated rapidly within 48 hours. He died alone in his apartment. With Julian's vendor contract clearance at Vance Tech, he had easy access to the San Jose data center. Moving a body in the middle of the night would have been effortless. I closed my eyes, practically seeing Marcus sitting across from Julian and Maya, a diligent young security auditor, trying to do his job, trying to report fraud through the proper channels, drinking whatever Julian handed him, and then going home to die alone. And Julian just waited, ready to use his body as a prop for Claire's disappearance. The attorney Marcus contacted, I said. Do they still have any of the evidence he offered? No, Agent Rostova said. He hadn't delivered it yet. Whatever physical documents he had, Julian took and destroyed. But we have the flash drive Claire left behind, with the exact same information. Marcus's death won't be in vain. When are you making the arrest? I asked. The warrants will be ready by Tuesday morning, Agent Rostova said. Woman will execute at 6 sharp, hitting Julian's place and Maya's luxury condo at the same time. Federal agents with local backup. First-degree murder, conspiracy, money laundering, and the attempted murder against you. The arraignment will happen Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday morning, 48 hours. Then Julian and Maya would wake up to federal agents pounding on their doors, get read their rights, get their mugshots taken, and be locked in a downtown holding cell. Mr. Vance, Agent Rostova added, her voice turning serious, until then, please be careful. If Julian or Maya sense anything is off. I'll be careful, I said. After she hung up, I stood by the window, watching the night completely swallow the California coastline. Marcus Reed was only 28 years old, living by himself in a city where nobody noticed he was gone, trying to do the right thing the legal way, and my son-in-law destroyed his entire existence for it. He called a lawyer, followed the protocols, and believed that if he reported the fraud correctly, the system would protect him. Instead, Julian framed him, used his disappearance to fake my daughter's death, and locked him away in some dark corporate hole like a piece of spare hardware. Julian and Maya would be arrested on Tuesday morning, but Marcus would still be dead. Someone had to remember that he tried. Someone had to make sure his death counted for something. A young tech worker trying to do the right thing deserved a better ending than absolute silence. On Monday morning, I made 3 phone calls to Silicon Valley Tech Trade Publications and Marcus's college alumni magazine. I left my name and number. I told them I had information about a young security auditor who died trying to expose corporate fraud. I said his name belonged in the papers, not buried in an FBI case file. Then I put on a sharp suit and drove to Vance Tech for the emergency board meeting Julian had called. At 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, Julian Thorne stood at the head of the long table, presenting his so-called transition paperwork, completely unaware that in less than 24 hours, federal agents would be escorting him out of this building in handcuffs. The penthouse boardroom overlooked the entire Silicon Valley landscape. Massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a 16-seat mahogany table, the exact same view I had looked at for 35 years. Julian was standing right where I used to stand, right in the spot where the orders get given. He had brought a thick binder he called the Strategic Transition Initiative. Professional binding, tabbed sections, the kind of legal document someone paid a lot of money to make look flawless. This transition plan not only respects Claire's vision, but it will pave the way for our exponential growth, Julian said, his voice carrying the exact kind of confidence belonging to a man who thinks he's about to own the place. As her husband, I promised to properly steward everything she built. The board members sat around the table, all faces I'd known for years. Our CFO, the head of manufacturing, and 3 outside directors representing minority investors. They were listening with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for whoever holds the power. Maya sat 2 seats down from Julian, wearing a charcoal dress, a notepad open in front of her with absolutely nothing written on it. A grieving family member supporting her brother-in-law. She played the part perfectly. I sat at the far end of the table, invited as a retired founder, a courtesy presence Julian couldn't really deny. Victor sat right next to me, a pen in his hand, completely motionless. Julian pointed to the binder. These documents will officially confirm the transfer of equity and authorize the restructuring of certain legacy assets that no longer align with our strategic direction. Legacy assets. He meant the core patents Claire had acquired over the years, the supply chain foundation she had bled to build. What is the timeline for implementation? An outside director asked. Immediate, Julian said. The market rewards decisiveness, not hesitation. Claire knew that better than anyone. She would want us to move forward, not be paralyzed by grief. The way he used Claire's name made him sound like a man who loved her deeply, not a thief who conspired with her sister to steal her life's work, not a killer who murdered a 28-year-old auditor and tried to poison his father-in-law. I watched him present slides about operational efficiency and strategic realignment. I watched him smile at directors who asked questions. I watched him use my daughter's memory to legitimize taking everything she ever worked for. Just 24 hours more. That was all I needed to do. We appreciate you being here, Arthur. Julian turned to me, offering his superior nod. Your decades of leadership gave us an incredible foundation, and we are honored to build on top of it. I know these technical details can get overwhelming, so please don't feel obligated to stay for every phase of the transition logistics. Condescending care, politely dismissing an old man who built this company with his bare hands in a garage 35 years ago. I'm just here to observe, I said flatly. Of course, Julian smiled. Your wisdom is always invaluable to us. He turned back to his slides, talking about modernization and competitive advantage. The directors nodded along, asking detailed questions about timelines and execution. Victor's pen stayed resting on his notepad. He wrote nothing, just sat beside me, serving as another witness to Julian's performance. Julian passed around the signature pages. The documents authorized the equity transfer and operational restructuring, standard corporate succession paperwork. The directors signed, passing the pages down the table. Nobody questioned the validity because everything looked legal. Professional binding, ironclad legal jargon, a widow's husband taking over what he was entitled to. At 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, federal agents with arrest warrants would show them just how ridiculous that was. I want to make it clear, Julian said, standing up again after collecting the signature pages. This transition has been incredibly difficult for our family. Losing Claire is devastating, but she built something legendary here. The best way to honor her is to make sure her vision stays alive. He was looking straight at me when he said it. His eyes were direct, and his expression was completely sincere. Claire would want us to move forward with strength and unity, Julian continued. She believed in this company, she believed in everyone sitting around this table, and she believed in the entire tech community we serve. That belief does not die with her passing. The directors stayed quiet, their faces respectful, clearly moved by this grieving husband's determination. I thought about Claire's carbon fiber casket, about that little chuckle that had echoed from inside it, about the note guiding me to the San Jose data center, and about every single transaction and email she had gathered over 8 months to prove their guilt. My daughter wasn't gone. She was out there in the dark, plotting her next move. And tomorrow morning, when federal agents walked into this building, Julian was going to find out exactly how flawless her execution really was. "Are there any questions?" Julian asked. Nobody spoke. "Then I think that wraps up our meeting for today," Julian said. "Thank you all for your support during this incredibly difficult time. Claire's life's work is in safe hands now." The directors stood up, gathering their files, offering their congratulations along with their condolences to Julian. Maya accepted sympathetic touches on her arm, playing the supportive family member to absolute perfection. Victor and I stayed in our seats until the boardroom completely cleared out. Julian was the last one to leave, clutching the leather binder under his arm, the exact signature pages he'd been dreaming of. He stopped at the double doors and looked back at me. "Arthur," he said, "what I said earlier about gratitude, I meant it. You built an extraordinary empire here." "Past tense," I said. "Used to build." "True," Julian smiled, "but your legacy is going to live on through all of us." Then he walked out. I sat at the far end of the long table, looking at the empty chair where Julian had just been standing, and at the window behind it that framed the Silicon Valley view I'd known for most of my life. Julian had smiled at me from the other end of that table, a confident smile from a man who was absolutely sure he had won the grand prize, thinking the old man sitting at the far end was just a piece of decorative furniture. I smiled right back. Let him think that. Let him sign every document, make every grand statement, and personally ink his own indictment. Tomorrow morning the FBI would arrive, and Julian Thorne would learn exactly what it feels like when the person who is 3 steps ahead of everyone else finally closes the trap. Julian left that boardroom absolutely convinced he had won. I let him believe it. 24 hours, that was all the longer this show needed to last. Around 5 that evening, Victor called me, his voice carrying that tight, focused edge it only got when he found a massive breakthrough. "Can you come over to my office?" he asked. "Before the arrests happen tomorrow, I found something regarding the corporate equity that you absolutely need to see." I drove toward downtown San Francisco, navigating through the heavy rush hour traffic, parked in the garage beneath Victor's building, and took the elevator up to the 22nd floor. The lamp on Victor's desk cast a warm amber glow against the dark November night outside the windows. The desktop was completely covered in paperwork, corporate filings, stock certificates, and documents stamped by the Delaware Secretary of State. "What is all this?" I asked. Victor pointed to a document dated March 15th. "Claire bought 9% of the outstanding shares in Vance Tech 8 months ago, a completely private transaction with Arnold, one of our retired minority shareholders." I picked up the document. Claire's signature was inked in deep blue. Purchase price, $80 million. 9% of outstanding stock transferred to Claire Elizabeth Vance. "Incredibly low profile," Victor said. "No press releases, no board announcements, just a perfectly legal transfer of equity between 2 willing parties. Arnold wanted to cash out, and Claire wanted deeper control." "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked. "Because she was building a fortress," Victor said, sliding another document toward me. "Look at the corporate bylaws. These are the original articles we filed back in 1991 when you started the company." I knew those bylaws. I drafted them 35 years ago with Victor's help. "Section 7, Victor said. "Founders' shares. You hold 52% of the stock. Non-transferable except to an immediate heir, and even then, it requires a supermajority board approval." "I remember," I said. 52%, Victor repeated, scribbling the numbers on his legal pad. "Plus Claire's 9%. That puts absolute family control at 61%. 61%, the magic number for corporate dominance. Cross that line and you hold absolute power over life and death in the company." "Which means Julian's transition documents," I said slowly, "are completely worthless." Victor nodded. "He can claim her shares as her spouse, but without your signature on the founder's shares, he can't execute any corporate restructuring, liquidation, or asset sales. And Section 7 explicitly states your shares can only transfer to an immediate heir with board approval. Julian is an outsider. He would never get that approval. I sat back in the leather chair across from Victor's desk. 22 floors below, the lights of the San Francisco Bay Area flickered in the dark. She locked down the entire board, I said. Long before she disappeared, Victor confirmed. Julian can have all the transition paperwork he wants. He can sign agreements, host board meetings, and pretend to be CEO. But without your 52%, he controls absolutely nothing. Claire made sure of that back in March. 8 months before her funeral. 8 months before Marcus Reed died. 8 months before I found that note in her casket. She knew, I said. Way back in March, she already knew what Julian and Maya were planning. Or she had a massive suspicion, Victor said. Either way, she protected the company before she gathered the evidence, before she faked her death, and before any of this actually happened. I looked down at the filing documents spread across Victor's desk, the corporate records from Delaware, the stock transfer certificates, and Claire's meticulous signature. Claire was playing a game Julian didn't even have the capacity to understand. While he and Maya were plotting to transfer assets and set up offshore accounts, discussing how to make my death look like old age and using Marcus's body to cover up Claire's disappearance, my daughter had already built an iron cage around them, so precise they didn't even notice the bars. The stock purchase in March, the cybersecurity compliance audit that pulled up the fraud, the flash drive with 8 months of emails and wire logs, the fake death with Dr. Sterling's cooperation, the note directing me to the cold storage, and the audio device in the casket. Every single step calculated, every single move planned well in advance. She set the stage before any of this even started, I said. Before Marcus died, before she ever contacted the FBI, before everything. March 24th, 2026, Victor said, pointing to the date on the Delaware filing. Your daughter spent 8 months building a cage, and Julian didn't even know he was sitting inside it the entire time. March of 2026, 8 months of planning, always 8 months ahead. I thought back to when Claire was 8 years old, playing chess against Victor during Sunday lunches while I caught up on emails. She could beat Victor by the time she was 10, beat me by the time she was 12, always looking 3 steps ahead and seeing patterns nobody else noticed. The FBI is arresting them tomorrow morning, I said. Yes, Victor confirmed. But even without the FBI, I continued, even without the evidence, without Marcus's body, without the poison, and without the flash drive, Julian never stood a chance of winning, Victor finished. The day Claire bought those shares, this company was legally locked down tight. Everything else was just giving him enough rope to hang himself. I stood up and walked over to Victor's window, looking out at the flowing headlights and the sprawling city lights. Claire must have looked at this exact same view when she came into this office back in March, asking Victor to file those Delaware documents and buying 9% of her own family's company to protect it from the people trying to steal it. Where is she? I asked. I don't know, Victor said. But wherever your daughter is, she's watching this entire script play out exactly the way she wrote it. The next day was the day of the arrests. I didn't sleep a wink on Monday night. My mind was completely flooded with thoughts of Claire's signature on those Delaware files, her incredibly precise planning, and the fact that she'd built her defense back in March while Julian and Maya were still whispering in the dark, always 3 steps ahead. At 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning, just hours before the FBI was scheduled to make their move, Victor called with the final piece of the puzzle, the one that explained exactly what I'd seen in Maya's eyes back at that seaside coffee shop. I dug up something else, he said without any greeting. Maya's banking records. My contact at the financial compliance firm flagged an offshore account. I was standing by the kitchen window, watching the pale Tuesday light creep over the bay. Go ahead. An account in the Caymans opened 6 months ago, Victor said, but not under the name Maya Vance. She used her mother's maiden name, Maya Gallagher, your late wife's family name. I remembered that name. An old money Bay Area family, though they had completely run out of funds by the time we married. Maya using it made perfect sense for respectable anonymity. How much? I asked. The account was set up to receive a wire transfer of $3.2 million from multiple routing sources, Victor said. The Vance Tech operating accounts. The exact laundering channels Julian set up. If she could get the access, maybe even Julian's private accounts too. When is it scheduled to clear? There's a first-class one-way ticket booked for Friday morning, November 29th at 9 o'clock, out of San Francisco to Geneva, with a connecting flight to Grand Cayman. A private banking relationship has already been established with Credit Suisse in the Caymans. Friday morning. That was 3 days away. Exactly 3 days after Julian had confidently signed his transition paperwork yesterday. And she opened this account back in March, I said slowly. March 14th, Victor confirmed. The exact same week Claire bought those shares. Your daughters were moving at the same time, just in complete opposite directions. Claire was protecting the firm. Maya was planning her escape. Where did she think she was getting $3.2 million? I asked. Victor's voice was heavy. The Vance Tech accounts Julian gave her access to. The offshore funds they'd already moved, maybe even Julian's private money. She had his passwords and routing access. She gave herself exactly 3 days after yesterday's board meeting to clean everything out and completely vanish. $3.2 million. That wasn't half of what Julian thought they were stealing together. This wasn't a fair split between partners. It was every single dollar she could squeeze out before disappearing. Julian has no idea, I said. My guess is he's completely clueless, Victor agreed. He thinks they're partners, thinks they're going to start a new life together once they steal your company and remove you. He has no idea his accomplice booked a one-way ticket without him. I thought back to that coffee shop meeting, the absolute stillness in Maya's hands as she held her coffee cup, the cold detachment whenever she mentioned Claire's name, and the way she offered an alliance against Julian just to test if I was an asset or a threat, if I suspected anything, or if I could still be used. When she realized neither would work, she just kept moving forward with her escape plan. She never had any intention of sharing anything with Julian, I said. From day one, Julian was always the fallback guy meant to take the fall. Yes, Victor said softly. Call Agent Rostovas, I said. Flag Maya Vance's passports, including the one under Maya Gallagher. Block that Friday flight to Geneva. Send her every single piece of data you have. I'm already drafting the email, Victor said. But Arthur, this changes the whole nature of the case. Julian is greedy and violent, but Maya is the mastermind. She put him up to the embezzlement, the murder of Marcus, and the plan to poison you, all while preparing to run off with the cash. A one-way ticket. No turning back. No Julian. No sister. No father. Just Maya and the money on a beach in Grand Cayman, where nobody asks questions about a woman named Gallagher with $3 million at Credit Suisse. Julian still thinks he's using her, I said. He had it backward from the very beginning, Victor confirmed. I hung up the phone and stood by the kitchen window, watching November creep over the San Francisco Bay. Somewhere in this city, Julian Thorne was waking up, fully convinced he had taken control of Vance Tech yesterday, convinced he had won. Somewhere else, Maya was probably looking at her flight confirmation, checking her Cayman balance, and counting down to Friday, when she would board a plane and leave her partner to face federal murder charges, all by himself. And in less than 3 hours, federal agents with warrants were going to show up at both of their doors. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. Agent Rostova. Passport flags are confirmed, she said. Both Maya Vance and Maya Gallagher have been flagged in the system. She won't be boarding any flights, domestic or international. Thank you, I said. Your lawyer sent over the banking records, Agent Rostova continued. This gives us ironclad proof of premeditation. Maya establishing a fallback route 6 months before the murder proves long-term planning, not a crime of passion. The U.S. attorney is going to love this. When are you making the arrests? I asked. 10 o'clock sharp simultaneous hits, Agent Rostova said. Julian at his residence in Palo Alto. Maya at her luxury high-rise condo in San Francisco. Local PD is providing backup. Both will be in custody and arraigned by this afternoon. 3 hours. I thought about that coffee shop meeting again, the way Maya had tested me with her concerned daughter act, calculating if I was useful or an obstacle. She had looked at Julian the exact same way from the very start, not as a partner, but as a tool to be discarded the second his purpose was served. Julian was greedy and violent. He killed Marcus and tried to poison me, but Maya was far more terrifying. She was patient, methodical, and completely unattached. She engineered the whole thing while keeping her own hands clean, planning to drink champagne at 30,000 feet, while her sister's husband got busted for murder. From the very beginning, she viewed Julian as a disposable piece on a board. In 3 hours, both of them were about to find out what it felt like when a meticulously planned game completely falls apart. At 10 o'clock sharp, the FBI executed the warrants. Agent Rostova called 30 minutes later to confirm that both Julian Thorne and Maya Vance were in federal custody, with arraignment set for 4 in the afternoon. Shuju Center details and corporate filings were safe in their hands. I thanked her and hung up, then drove out to the Restful Shores funeral home to sign the paperwork, to release the body that wasn't my daughter. I was sitting in Mr. Harrison's office, about to sign the final authorization for cremation, when a woman brought me a cup of black coffee, no sugar, exactly the way I'd drank it for 40 years. The office smelled of furniture polish and the scent of flowers from downstairs. The late autumn afternoon sun was coming through the window that overlooked the parking lot. The funeral director sat across from me, reviewing the death certificate one more time, his practiced sympathy looking exactly the same as it had when this whole thing started a week ago. "The cremation will take place tomorrow morning," Mr. Harrison said, turning a page in his folder. "You'll have the ashes within 48 hours. We use Pacific Cremation Services. Very professional, very dignified." I nodded, signing where he indicated, initialing to confirm I understood the process was irreversible. Marcus Reed was finally going to get a proper burial. His name would be restored. The young compliance auditor who tried to do the right thing would no longer be buried as my daughter. "I know this is difficult," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of hosting these exact conversations. "Signing these documents makes everything feel incredibly final." "It's been a long time coming," I said. A soft knock at the door cut us off. I looked up as a woman in a dark blue service uniform stepped into the room, holding a small tray with 2 coffee cups. She was young, late 20s or early 30s, her dark hair tied back in a neat, simple bun. It was the kind of completely unremarkable professional look that made it easy to blend into the background of a service staff. "Your coffees, gentlemen," she whispered, her voice soft and almost apologetic. "Compliments of the home." She set one down next to Mr. Harrison, then placed the second cup on the desk, right in front of me. Steam rose from the dark liquid. "Exactly how you like it, sir," she said quietly without making eye contact. I stared down at the cup. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar, the exact way I drank it since I was 20, working the early shift on the hardware assembly line. "I didn't order any coffee," I said. The woman was already moving toward the door. "It's standard service for family consultation, sir. Is there anything else you need?" "No, we're fine," Mr. Harrison said, picking up his cup. "Thank you." She stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. I looked over at Mr. Harrison. "Since when do you provide custom coffee orders for signing cremation paperwork?" He paused, his cup halfway to his mouth. "We actually don't. That's highly unusual. Must be a new hire trying to be thorough." I looked at the cup. Black, no sugar. The drink I'd had for 40 years. It was the coffee Claire learned to make when she was 12 years old, back when she would come to my office on Saturday mornings, just to sit with me while I worked overtime at the campus. Someone knew, someone had been watching. Mr. Harrison went back to reviewing the final documents. I signed my name where he indicated, my hand perfectly steady even though my heart had suddenly started hammering against my ribs. "That settles the paperwork," Mr. Harrison said, "unless you have any questions about the timeline for the service, or—" "I'm fine," I said, standing up. "Thank you." I gathered my copy of the cremation authorization. Mr. Harrison stood up as well, extending his hand. "Our deepest condolences once again, Mr. Vance," he said. "If the family needs anything else—" "We appreciate everything you've done," I said. I walked to the door and opened it. The woman in the dark blue uniform was standing in the hallway, clearing a tray from a side table. She looked up as I stepped out, then started walking past me toward the stairs. As she went by, her hand brushed against mine. It wasn't an accident, it was entirely deliberate. Her index finger pressed hard against the center of my palm. Firm, unmistakable. The gesture lasted maybe half a second, but it felt like an electric shock traveling straight up my arm. A single press, her index finger applying a firm, deliberate weight right into the middle of my open hand. It was a code we invented when Claire was 6 years old. She used to be terrified of thunderstorms, crying in her bedroom at 2 in the morning whenever the lightning rolled over the San Francisco Bay. I would hold her hand and teach her that exact code. 1 press, "I'm okay." 2 presses, "Come find me." 3 presses, "Danger." She had used that code her entire childhood. In her teenage years, if she stayed out late and wanted me to know she was safe without having to say a word in front of her friends, she'd press it into my hand. In college, she'd look across a crowded room and give me a subtle sign that she was fine, telling me not to worry. We hadn't used it in years, not since she grew up, took over the firm, and became a fierce corporate executive who no longer needed her father's protection. But I knew that touch. I was the one who taught it to her 30 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. The woman kept walking down the hallway without looking back. Blue uniform, dark hair, a completely forgettable appearance designed to fade into the background the second you look away. But that touch, that deliberate weight in the center of my palm, was absolute. Mr. Harrison stepped out of his office behind me. "Mr. Vance, are you all right?" I turned around. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just need a minute to catch my breath." "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." I watched the woman walk down the stairs, disappearing into the first floor of the funeral home, her blue uniform vanishing around the corner. That single index finger signal, born 30 years ago from bedtime stories, scraped knees, and her first day of kindergarten, right before she walked into that classroom alone and I squeezed her hand 3 times for danger, told me everything I needed to know. My daughter wasn't just alive, she was right here. She had brought me a coffee made exactly to my taste. In a bustling funeral home, with Mr. Harrison standing less than 15 feet away, completely oblivious, she had delivered our childhood code. Claire had been watching over me the entire time, through the funeral, through the investigation, through Julian's board meetings, and through Maya's terrible performance at the coffee shop. She was so close that she personally handed me a cup of coffee while I was signing the paperwork to cremate a body that had stolen her name. I walked down the stairs, stepped out into the chilly November afternoon, and got into my car. Gripping the steering wheel, I just sat there in the parking lot of Restful Shores. Julian and Maya were going to federal custody. Marcus Reed was getting his name back. The company was locked down tight by the corporate filings Claire submitted back in March. And my daughter had just told me, in a language only the 2 of us understood, that she was okay. As I drove home from the funeral home, that signal felt like it was still burning in the center of my palm. 1 press. I'm okay. She was alive, she was close by, and she was still running the show. Before his arrest, Julian had scheduled a second board meeting for Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. He had announced to the directors on Monday that this would be a final asset transition meeting to lock everything down. By 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, when Julian's attorney, Philip Morse, called the meeting to order, I was already sitting in my seat. I told him I'd be here. There were 13 people sitting around that boardroom table, facing 200 pages of documentation and a trap that had been set perfectly. Julian stood at the head of the long table, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my salary during my first year on the assembly line. Maya sat 3 seats down, dressed in black with diamond earrings, looking like the picture of calm family stability. The rest of the seats were filled with board members, all old faces I'd known for years, people who had spent their careers at Vance Tech. Victor sat right next to me at the far end of the table, his leather briefcase resting against the chair leg. He brought his notary seal. We were ready. Philip Morse, the corporate attorney Julian brought in from Morse and Partners, sat directly across from Julian. He was in his late 50s with a full head of silver hair, the kind of meticulous document reviewer who prided himself on spotting loopholes in the fine print. He brought his own briefcase packed with files. "Thank you all for being here," Julian started, his voice carrying that easy confidence of a man who thinks he's already won the grand prize. "I know the last few weeks have been incredibly difficult. Losing Claire is a devastating blow to all of us. But she built something extraordinary here, and the best way to honor her legacy is to ensure strong leadership for the firm moving forward." Ta pointed to the packets sitting in front of every chair. "These documents will officially implement the transition plan we discussed on Monday, the transfer of assets, operational authorities, and board restructuring. These are all things Claire and I discussed. Every single word was a lie. But I just sat there quietly, looking defeated and broken, playing my part exactly as we planned. Arthur," Julian turned to me with a condescending layer of sympathy, "I know how hard this is, letting go of what you built. But Claire trusted me to take this company to the next level. I hope you can too." "I just want to get this over with," I said. Julian smiled. "Of course. Phil, if you could walk us through the signature pages." Philip Morse opened his briefcase and pulled out his own annotated copy. "I've reviewed everything: standard succession paperwork, asset transfer agreements, equity assignment, and operational power of attorney. All legally sound." "Let's get started then," Julian said. The boardroom door opened, and a young kid in a catering uniform pushed a coffee cart into the room. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said quietly. "Just setting up some refreshments for your meeting." He moved around the table, setting down a cup of coffee at each seat. When he got to me, he placed a cup down and murmured, "Black, no sugar, for Mr. Vance." I looked down at the cup, then over at the cart. The logo on the side read Bay Area Gulf Catering, the exact same logo from the cart at the funeral home 3 days ago, when Claire had delivered my coffee and pressed that code into my palm. She was still here, still watching, always 3 steps ahead. The young kid finished distributing the coffee and left, closing the door behind him. "Where were we?" Julian asked. "The signature pages," Philip Morse said, flipping through his packet. "Mr. Thorne, you sign first as the assignee. Mr. Vance signs across from you as the assigner. The board members will sign as witnesses." Julian pulled out an expensive fountain pen and started signing every single page without even looking at them. Confident, rapid, page after page. "No need to re-verify what Phil already cleared," Julian said, glancing over at me. "Let's just wrap this up." "No rush," I said flatly. "I want to make sure everything is in order." Julian kept signing. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Victor watched with the intense focus of an attorney who knew exactly what was coming next. Julian signed straight through to page 7 without a single hesitation, then slid the packet over to me. I signed across from every one of Julian's signatures, but not as the assigner, only as a witness to the commitments Julian was making himself. Philip Morse gathered the pages. Once we finished, his lawyer instincts kicked in for a final verification, and he started reviewing the signed sheets. The exact second he flipped to page 7, his face went completely white. "Julian," he whispered, "stop." "What is it?" Julian was reaching for his coffee. Looking down at page 7, Philip's voice cracked with tension. "This isn't an asset transfer provision. What are you talking about?" Julian snatched the packet away, flipped to page 7, and started reading. The color drained from his face. "This is impossible," he stammered. "I read every page yesterday. This isn't—" "It's an irrevocable, permanent power of attorney, an asset relinquishment waiver," Philip read over Julian's shoulder, "stating that effective immediately, you are transferring all personal assets, equity, and corporate control completely to Arthur Vance, along with a full admission of guilt regarding intellectual property conversion. You just signed away your authority over your own bank accounts, real estate, investments, and company shares." "This is fraud!" Julian banged his hand on the table as he stood up. The documents were swapped. Arthur, You signed what was placed in front of you today, Julian, I said calmly. Not what you looked at yesterday. The old bait and switch works both ways. Victor stood up, pulling his notary seal from his briefcase. I witnessed the signatures. Julian Thorne, being of sound mind, executed this waiver and admission. Perfectly legal and completely binding. Julian stared down at the paperwork in his hands, then looked over at me and back to Philip Morse. This is fraud, Julian repeated. I'll have you arrested. You signed it, I said. Phil witnessed it. It's legally binding. Your own attorney verified the file before signing. Those were your exact words. This document isn't what was here yesterday, Julian's voice rose. Someone switched. Prove it, I said. Philip Morse was rapidly reading through the terms of the waiver and admission, his professional mask completely shattered. Julian, this document is incredibly comprehensive. It grants Arthur total authority over everything in your name. Your house, your offshore accounts, I know what it says, Julian snapped. Maya sat completely frozen in her chair, watching Julian break down, likely running the calculations in her mind to see if this would impact her Friday flight to Geneva. Julian opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. He had absolutely nothing to say. His lawyer stared at the signature page like the paper was about to burst into flames. The directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the coffee from Bay Area, Gulf catering cooling in front of each of them. There was absolutely nothing Julian could say about a signature witnessed by his own attorney on a document he signed without reading. Right then, the boardroom doors swung open. Special Agent Elena Rostova walked into the room without any rush, holding her badge up, with 3 FBI agents following right behind her. There was no dramatic scene, just that cold, heavy pressure that ends with handcuffs. Julian Thorne, Maya Vance, her voice carried that official authority as it echoed through the room. I'm Special Agent Elena Rostova with the FBI San Francisco Field Office. We have federal arrest warrants for both of you. Julian stayed standing, still holding the admission document he'd just signed. He stared at Agent Rostova like she had appeared out of thin air. On what charges? Philip Morse stepped forward, trying to challenge her. I am Mr. Thorne's counsel. I demand to see the documentation. Agent Rostova pulled 2 folded sheets from her coat. Murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Does that cover it, counselor? She handed the warrants to Philip. He scanned them quickly, and whatever composure he had left completely evaporated. This is a setup. Julian's voice turned high and sharp. Arthur, tell them. Tell them this is all you... Agent Rostova stepped up, cutting him off. You are being charged with first-degree murder in the death of Marcus Paul Reed on or about October 30th, 2026, and the attempted murder of Arthur Vance via aconite poisoning. You have the right to remain silent. I didn't murder anybody, Julian shouted. Arthur is standing right there fine. I didn't. Forensics pulled aconite residue from your vehicle and your residence, Agent Rostova continued. The body of Marcus Reed has been recovered from cold storage. Toxicology confirms death by aconite poisoning. The timeline matches late October, the exact days you notified staff he was on leave for a family emergency. Marcus Reed, the young security compliance auditor who tried to do the right thing, was murdered by Julian and used as a body double to fake Claire's death, Agent Rostova said, reading from the warrant. You have the right to an attorney, Agent Rostova continued, if you cannot afford one. I have an attorney, Julian yelled, gesturing wildly toward Philip Morse. Philip held up the paperwork, his voice dropping into a sharp command. Julian, shut up. Do not say another word. 2 federal agents stepped forward. One of them grabbed Julian's arms and twisted them behind his back. The handcuffs closed with a sharp, crisp click. Aconite. The exact same poison that had killed the rare bonsai tree on my windowsill. The poison that had been sitting in my kitchen meant for me. Maya Vance, Agent Rostova said, turning her attention to my youngest daughter. Maya had sat completely motionless through Julian's arrest. Now she stood up slowly, her face remarkably calm. "You are being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, and embezzlement of family trust assets," Agent Rostova told her. "You have the right to remain silent." "I want to cooperate," Maya interrupted immediately, her voice urgent but steady. "I have evidence. Video evidence. Video of Julian preparing the toxin and planning the whole thing. I'll testify. I'll give you everything." Julian's head snapped toward her, his jaw dropping. "What?" "I recorded it," Maya said, looking only at the agent. "The garage security system caught Julian mixing the aconite and injecting it into the scotch. I kept it as insurance. I'm willing to fully cooperate in exchange for total immunity." Agent Rostova's expression didn't change at all. "We obtained your garage security footage 72 hours ago, Miss Vance. Your cooperation will be noted for sentencing, but it doesn't change the charges against you." Maya's face turned completely white. "That's impossible. I never—" "You sent it to an encrypted email address on Monday night," Agent Rostova said. "What you didn't know is that the account has been under total FBI surveillance for weeks, because it was tied to your offshore laundering activities." Maya turned her head to look at Julian. He was staring back at her with absolute naked fury. "You were going to use that against me," he spat, his teeth clenched. "You were a fallback guy," Maya said, her voice dropping into a cold, flat tone. "From day one." "Ms. Vance," Agent Rostova said, "put your hands behind your back." Another agent stepped up with handcuffs. Maya held her wrists out in front of her instead of behind, resisting the reality of the situation until the very last second. The agent firmly turned her around and pulled her hands behind her back, clicking the cuffs into place. "This isn't fair," Maya said, her voice tightening. "I was trying to help. I was trying to stop Julian." "You were trying to run off to Geneva on Friday with $3.2 million, Agent Rostova replied coldly. "We've already frozen those accounts. Your passports are flagged. The flight you booked under Maya Gallagher has been canceled." Maya closed her mouth. No more deals. No more room to manipulate. "Arthur!" Julian shouted as the agents began to guide him toward the door. "You engineered this whole thing. The swapped papers, the FBI, all of it. I looked at my son-in-law, the man who had murdered Marcus Reed, tried to poison me, and attempted to use my daughter's disappearance to steal everything I had built. I didn't have to engineer anything, Julian," I said calmly. "You built this cage all by yourselves." "Move them out," Agent Rostova commanded. "Transport to the downtown federal holding facility." The agents escorted Julian and Maya toward the boardroom doors. Julian was in his $4,000 charcoal suit, and Maya was in her designer heels and diamond earrings, both of them with their hands cuffed behind their backs. The board members backed up against the walls, clearing a wide path for them. Philip Morse stayed frozen in his spot, still clutching the arrest warrant. Victor sat right next to me, taking detailed notes for future testimony with a lawyer's methodical precision. They were marched right out of the same double doors they had confidently strolled through just 2 days ago on Monday afternoon. Back then, Julian was presenting his transition plan, and Maya was playing the supportive sibling, both of them absolutely certain they had won. Dead silence fell over the boardroom. Agent Rostova paused at the doorway, looked back at me and gave a single nod, a professional acknowledgement. Then she turned and followed the agents down the hall. I sat at the long mahogany table, looking at the coffee cups from Bay Area Gulf Catering sitting in front of the empty chairs. Claire's network, Claire's design. The boardroom was totally quiet, except for a sound floating in from the hallway. Someone was clapping slowly and deliberately. It wasn't the applause for a theatrical performance. It was a steady acknowledgement of justice finally being delivered. I walked out of the boardroom and into the hallway. The person clapping was standing 20 feet away, her back to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. When she saw me, she stopped, lowered her hands, and smiled. It was Claire. There was no disguise this time, no dark blue service uniform, no hair tied back tightly into a bun. It was just my daughter, alive and breathing, standing in the hallway of the company she had run. "Press conference at 6 o'clock, she said softly. "At the Federal Building. You should come watch." And before I could say a single word, she turned and walked toward the elevators. The press room at the federal building was absolutely packed, with 30 journalists, a dozen television cameras, and a miracle brought back from the dead. Agent Rostova stood behind the podium, the FBI seal mounted on the wall behind her. She looked incredibly professional and composed. Victor and I sat in the front row on folding chairs. Behind us, the room was filled with reporters, local news stations, Silicon Valley tech publications, and even a few national outlets, all drawn in by a federal murder case involving top semiconductor executives. Flashes went off continuously, lighting up the room. Today, federal agents executed arrest warrants for Julian Thorne and Maya Vance on multiple federal charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Agent Rostova's voice came through the microphone, sharp and clear. Our investigation was assisted by a protected witness, who provided critical evidence and testimony. I sat up straight in my chair. Victor's hand stayed perfectly still on the armrest next to me. Julian Thorne is charged with the first-degree murder of Marcus Paul Reed, a 28-year-old compliance auditor at Vance Tech, and the attempted murder of Arthur Vance via aconite poisoning. Agent Rostova continued. Maya Vance is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, and embezzlement. Both are currently in federal custody. The journalists scribbled furiously on their pads, the red lights on the cameras flashing steady. At this time, I would like to introduce the individual whose assistance was vital to breaking this case. Agent Rostova said, stepping back from the podium. The side door opened, and Claire walked into the press room. The flashbulbs erupted into a blinding strobe light. A collective gasp rippled through the press pool. Someone yelled, "That's Claire Vance! She's supposed to be dead!" "That's my daughter," I said to myself. "That's Claire." She was wearing a simple gray business suit, no jewelry, her hair pulled back into a professional bun. Her stride as she walked toward the podium carried that exact same confidence she'd developed over 15 years of navigating clean rooms and boardrooms. "My name is Claire Vance," she said under the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "I staged my own death on November 21st and have been operating under the FBI's Witness Protection Program. This was done to expose the murder of Marcus Reed and the attempted murder of my father, Arthur Vance." The room completely erupted. Reporters were shouting questions over one another, the flashes lighting up her face. Agent Rostova stepped forward. "Hold your questions until the end, please." The room settled back down. Claire continued. "There was no insurance fraud involved in this operation. My life insurance policies were legally voided when I entered the federal program in March. No claims were filed, and no funds were collected. How does a daughter explain to her father why she let him believe she was dead for 6 whole days? How does she stand at a podium and describe attending her own funeral with the same clinical, precise tone she used for quarterly earnings reports? "How long have you been planning this?" a reporter shouted from the middle row. 8 months, Claire said. "Since March? That was when I discovered Julian Thorne was administering low-dose toxins to my father and realized he had murdered Marcus Reed to cover up systemic embezzlement within Vance Tech. 8 months, the exact same timeline Victor had found in the Delaware corporate filings. The exact same month she bought that 9% stake in the firm. Dr. Thomas Sterling, a retiring medical examiner and a close family friend, assisted with the documentation under FBI oversight," Claire said. "He falsified the death certificate, which allowed me to enter the protection program while the evidence was being gathered. Dr. Sterling cooperated fully with federal investigators from day one and received full transactional immunity in exchange for his assistance. Dr. Sterling, the name on the falsified death certificate, the godfather who made it all look legal. The individual placed in the casket was Marcus Reed," Claire continued. "Julian Thorne murdered him in late October and concealed his remains in a cold storage unit at the San Jose data center. The FBI has recovered Mr. Reed's remains and notified his family in Oregon. I thought about Marcus, 28 years old, trying to do the right thing and wiped out the second he found the truth. Vance Tech has been legally dissolved," Claire announced. All core patents and physical assets have been transferred to Vance Legacy Technologies. Group LLC, which is wholly owned by my father, Arthur Vance. Julian Thorne and Maya Vance have no legal claim to any corporate assets or real estate. She looked straight at me when she said it. Her eyes were direct, completely professional. It was like she was delivering a project milestone report. The FBI has months of surveillance footage, financial tracking, toxicology data, and my direct testimony, Claire said. Julian Thorne and Maya Vance will stand trial for murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The case is airtight. A reporter in the front row raised his hand, shouting over the noise, "Ms. Vance, what was it like to attend your own funeral?" Claire's face remained a total blank. "I will not be answering any further questions." "Thank you." She walked away from the podium. Agent Rostova stepped back into her spot, immediately taking the brunt of the chaotic wave of shouting reporters. Claire walked toward the side exit, passing within 5 feet of where I was sitting. She didn't slow down, and she didn't look my way once. She just walked straight through the door and vanished from sight. Victor leaned in close. "She looks exactly the same," he whispered. I stared at the door that had just closed behind my daughter. "She looks exactly the same." Victor's words echoed in my mind, the same face, the same stride, the same confident way of speaking, but something fundamental had changed. The woman who had just stood at that podium, explaining an 8-month-long deception, describing attending her own funeral with clinical precision, the woman who had walked right past her father without even pausing her step. That wasn't the daughter who used to bring me coffee on Saturday mornings and laugh at my garage startup stories. She survived. She won. She had engineered a flawless, precise act of corporate vengeance that would send Julian and Maya to federal prison for the rest of their lives. But she had paid a price for it, a price I was only just beginning to understand. The woman who walked out of that press room was no longer the daughter who had hugged me goodbye before this nightmare started 8 months ago. She looked like herself, but she wasn't, not entirely. The weeks following the press conference moved like silicon wafers on an assembly line, methodical, organized, and inevitable. Claire stayed in the Bay Area, but she didn't move back home. We spoke on the phone twice, brief conversations strictly limited to legal proceedings and the paperwork for the restructured company. She sounded exactly like her old self, but she really wasn't. Julian's attorney managed to secure a plea deal, avoiding a public trial. No public testimony. No need for Claire to sit in a courtroom and describe, face to face, the exact details of how she spent 8 months gathering evidence. The sentencing hearing was set for December 15th. The December air inside the courthouse smelled of floor wax and the cold stillness of a case finally reaching its end. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I walked into courtroom 4 of the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. High ceilings, walnut paneling, and the seal of the federal court hanging prominently behind the judge's bench. Agent Rostova was sitting in the gallery, her presence serving as a reminder that a federal investigation never truly ends with just an arrest. Julian Thorne sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands handcuffed in front of his chest. After 3 weeks in federal custody, he had visibly lost weight. The expensive Savile Row suits were gone. The confident executive who had presented the company's strategic transition plan had been replaced by a man who chose to plead guilty rather than face a trial. The evidence was ironclad and completely undeniable. Judge Raymond Fletcher walked in. He was in his late 50s with a full head of silver hair, carrying the kind of severe authority that comes from a 30-year career built on handing down heavy sentences to violent offenders. He had a notorious reputation for maximum sentencing in murder cases. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Fletcher said, settling into his chair, "you have entered a plea of guilty to all federal charges. First-degree murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, and conspiracy. We are here today for sentencing." Julian's attorney stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "The prosecution may proceed," Judge Fletcher said. Sarah Whitfield, the lead federal prosecutor for the California Major Crimes Unit, rose from the government's table. She was in her late 40s, wearing a sharp business suit, the exact person who had personally taken the case when Agent Rostova handed over the evidence. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment. "Your Honor," she said, "the government calls Arthur Vance to deliver a victim impact statement." I walked up to the witness stand, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Vance," Sarah Whitfield said, "please tell the court what happened in October of 2026. I looked over at Julian. He was staring straight down at the table in front of him. "I trusted Julian Thorne like he was my own son," I said. "He married my daughter, and he worked at my company for 7 years. I thought we were family." I paused, measuring my words carefully. "In October, I got sick. Fevers, nausea, hair loss, neurological tremors. I thought I was dying of old age. Thought this body was finally breaking down after 62 years of grinding in Silicon Valley. During that time, Julian came to visit me, bringing a high-end bottle of whiskey, showing nothing but fake concern. The entire time, he was poisoning me. Aconite extract, administered slowly over 3 weeks." Julian's shoulders tensed. "If it hadn't been for my daughter gathering the evidence," I continued, "if she hadn't left me instructions, I would be dead. Julian would have legally inherited my tech empire, and absolutely nobody would have questioned it. A heart attack for a 62-year-old man makes perfect sense." Sarah Whitfield nodded. "And what about Marcus Reed?" "Marcus Reed was a 28-year-old cybersecurity compliance auditor at Vance Tech," I said. "He discovered a systemic financial laundering fraud. He tried to report it through the proper channels. But Julian Thorne murdered him, poisoned him the exact same way, and used his body to fake my daughter's death. Marcus was killed, and nobody knew. Julian made it look like Marcus left for personal reasons. Marcus deserved better than to die completely alone and be forgotten by the world." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Sarah Whitfield said. "I have no further questions." I walked back to my seat in the gallery. Agent Rostova gave me a brief nod. Sarah Whitfield walked toward the bench, holding her sentencing memorandum. "Your Honor," her voice echoed through the courtroom, "Marcus Reed was murdered. Marcus Reed's death was covered up by a systemic fraud. Marcus Reed deserves justice today." She said his name 3 times, once for every count: murder, conspiracy, and fraud. "Marcus Reed, Marcus Reed, Marcus Reed." "The government requests the maximum penalty under the federal sentencing guidelines," Sarah Whitfield continued. 40 years without the possibility of parole. Julian Thorne murdered a young man who was simply doing his job. He attempted to murder his wife's father to steal a family business. He has shown no remorse, no hesitation, and no shred of humanity. He deserves no leniency. Judge Fletcher reviewed the memorandum, scanning the evidence summary. The courtroom was dead quiet, except for the rustle of turning pages. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Fletcher finally spoke, "do you have anything you wish to say before sentencing is passed?" Julian looked at his lawyer. His lawyer gave a slight shake of his head. "No, Your Honor," Julian said quietly. "Very well." Judge Fletcher set the memorandum down. "Julian Thorne, you have pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, and conspiracy. This court has reviewed the evidence, the victim impact statement, and the sentencing recommendation. This court finds that you demonstrated an extraordinary level of premeditation, shocking cold-bloodedness, and a complete disregard for human life. You murdered a young man to conceal your crimes. You attempted to murder your wife's father for financial gain. You showed no mercy. This court will show you none." He paused. "I sentence you to 40 years at the Cumberland Federal Correctional Institution without the possibility of parole. 40 years at Cumberland." Julian closed his eyes. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. 2 federal marshals stepped forward to escort him out. Julian stood up, his hands still cuffed. As the marshals guided him past my row, he stopped and looked straight at me. "I underestimated you," he whispered. The marshals pushed him along. Julian didn't resist, just kept walking toward the exit of the courtroom, toward the transport van that would take him to Cumberland, toward a 40-year abyss in a federal penitentiary. "You underestimated Claire," I thought to myself. "Not me." From the very beginning, he had picked the wrong opponent. He thought the old man was the threat, never realizing his wife was always 3 steps ahead, building an airtight case that would put him away for the rest of his life. 40 years at Cumberland. If Julian lived long enough to see freedom again, he'd be 80 years old. But he would likely spend those 40 years behind bars, fully convinced that Arthur Vance had engineered his downfall. He was still looking at me, completely missing the real player, Claire. The next morning, I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee when Victor called. He picked up on the second ring, and I expected his voice to carry that calm satisfaction that should have come after Julian's sentencing. Instead, he sounded tired, old, as if he'd spent the entire night sorting through facts that would never bring absolute justice. Maya's hearing just wrapped up, he said, skipping any greeting. 15 years at the Alderson Federal Prison Camp for Women in West Virginia. I slowly set my coffee cup down. 15 years. That was half the time Prosecutor Whitfield had estimated during our very first meeting at the federal building. Just half. She flipped, didn't she? It wasn't a question. I already knew the answer. Victor let out a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. She handed over everything. Every offshore account password, crypto transaction logs going back 2 years, recorded conversations of Julian's planning sessions. She even gave them a hidden piece of footage from her garage security camera showing Julian tampering with your whiskey decanter back on April 7th. Whitfield said her cooperation was exemplary. Total capitulation, zero resistance. I stared out the kitchen window at the redwood tree Claire had planted when she was 12. Right now, its branches were heavy with white frost. Spring would arrive eventually, uninvited, but that was months away. And Judge Carver accepted the plea? Judge Harriet Carver, Victor confirmed. She reviewed the cooperation agreement line by line. She acknowledged Maya's substantial assistance in cementing the case against Julian, but in the end she handed down 15. She said post-defense cooperation doesn't erase the reality of a pre-planned conspiracy to commit murder. Betrayal. The word still hit like a physical blow to my chest. My youngest daughter had sat in our family kitchen, listening to Julian plan how to utterly ruin my life. She knew about the fabricated liabilities. She knew the timeline for the hostile takeover. She said nothing. She did nothing. Between her own father and an outsider trying to bleed us dry, she chose Julian's plan. What kind of cooperation can make up for that? How did she look? The question surprised me. I hadn't planned on asking. I didn't even want to care. But somewhere deep inside, the father who used to read bedtime stories to a 5-year-old girl with a ponytail and scraped knees needed to know. Victor hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice was much lower. Small, Victor said. She looked tiny, Arthur. They brought her in wearing the orange jumpsuit from the county jail. No makeup, hair just tied back in a messy knot. When Judge Carver read the sentence, she cried, but she didn't make a sound, just sat there with tears running down her face. I closed my eyes, trying to picture the daughter I raised, trying to fit the little girl and the woman who traded my life for a payout into the same frame. The math didn't work. It never would. Whitfield spent 20 minutes on the record, Victor continued, detailing every single piece of assistance Maya provided, every password, every offshore shell structure, every recorded conversation proving Julian's premeditation. She painted Maya as a woman who made catastrophic choices but ultimately chose the truth. And the defense? Her attorney was Philip Chen, Victor said, the public defender assigned to her after Julian's assets were frozen. He pushed for 10, claiming Maya was under Julian's psychological control, a victim of a coercive marital dynamic. But Judge Carver wasn't having it. The judge stated on the record that Maya was fully autonomous, highly educated, and held the keys to the kingdom. Choosing not to warn your father that he's being poisoned isn't coercion, it's absolute complicity. The redwood branches swayed in the morning wind. I wondered if Claire was awake yet. Had she heard about Maya's sentence? Did she feel a single tremor of emotion for her sister? There's one more thing, Victor said, his tone shifting, becoming incredibly cautious. Go ahead. After the hearing, Victor said, one of the marshals told me what happened next. They gave Maya her one phone call before processing her for transport to Alderson. It's standard procedure. They brought her to the phone in the holding area and left her there. She picked up the receiver, held it in her hand, but she never dialed a number. The marshal said she just sat there for 3 full minutes, staring at the keypad. Then she hung up and told them she was ready to go. The coffee in my hand had gone completely cold. 3 minutes! That was the exact amount of time it took for my youngest daughter to realize she was entirely alone in the world. Julian was headed to federal prison in Cumberland. Claire had made it clear at the press conference that her relationship with Maya was over, and I was the father she had plotted to kill. Sanga minutes to take inventory of her life and find absolutely nothing left. Arthur, Victor's voice pulled me back. Are you still there? I'm here. Are you okay? Was I okay? Julian got 40 years. Maya got 15. Claire was alive. The firm was safe. By every legal metric, justice had been served. But somewhere in West Virginia, my youngest daughter was being processed into a federal facility where she would spend the next 15 years of her youth. Learning to sleep in a cell, eating in a mess hall, responding to a number instead of a name. On visiting days, she would have nobody to call because she had personally torched every single bridge that mattered. She made her choice, I said quietly. Victor didn't argue, and he didn't offer any hollow comfort. He knew as well as I did that some choices can't be unmade, and some bridges can never be rebuilt. I'll send over the transcript once the text is filed, he said. If you ever want to write, Alderson allows mail. I looked out at the redwood tree. I remembered Claire planting it when she was 12, dirt under her fingernails, her voice full of hope. I remembered Maya standing beside her at 7, crying because she felt like she wasn't allowed to help. Always on the outside, always desperate to be let in. Maybe, I said, though we both knew I never would. 15 years. She'd be 46 when she got out, assuming she survived the experience, and assuming anyone remembered her name by then. My proud little girl had taken every wrong turn available, and now she had nothing left. The new office smelled of fresh paint and possibilities. Those were 2 things I hadn't associated with work in decades. It had been 3 weeks since Maya's sentencing, 3 weeks since I found out my youngest daughter had nobody left to call. I hadn't written. I probably never would. Instead, I did something else. Victor and I stood on the 6th floor of what was about to become the new headquarters for Vance Legacy Tech, looking at empty desks and mismatched second-hand chairs. The 6th floor, Victor remarked, glancing out the window. Not quite the penthouse duplex suite from before. I walked over to the glass, looking down at the busy industrial park below. Forklifts were moving pallets, and technicians were unloading server racks. The real sweaty manufacturing work of Silicon Valley was happening right at eye level, not thousands of feet below us. Better view, I said. From here I can actually see the people sweating on the shop floor. Victor smiled, dropping his briefcase onto the desk that was about to be his. 8 of the legacy staff said they're coming back. They should be here by 9. 8 people. Before Julian's arrest, Vance Tech had 43 core managers. Only 8 chose to follow me here. The rest had scattered to competitors or taken early retirement. I didn't blame them. Working for a company that made national headlines for murder and embezzlement isn't exactly a stellar resume builder. The boardroom was small, 1 table, 10 chairs, a whiteboard with the plastic wrapping still clinging to the edges. No mahogany, no executive leather, just clean space and bright December sun. The windows looked like they might even need a good scrub, courtesy of us. By 9:15, they started trickling in. Tom Bradshaw, my hardware floor supervisor since 1997. Maria Kellerman, the logistics coordinator who knew every chip supply line across the Pacific. James and Patricia Hall, the married couple who ran our customer service department. And 4 others, names I'd known for years, faces I trusted. They had watched the scandal unfold, seen their former executives led away in handcuffs, and decided that the name Arthur Vance was still worth betting on. They gathered in the room, holding paper cups of coffee, the low chatter dying down as I took my spot at the head of the table. There were no slick PowerPoint slides, No grand corporate visions, just me and the people who chose to stay. You could have gone anywhere, I said. Thank you for choosing to be here. Tom Bradshaw, 62, his silver hair cropped short, leaned back in his chair with hands that bore the scars of 30 years of assembly work. You've always been fair to us, Mr. Vance. That counts for more than the name on the door. I looked around the room, seeing the kind of loyalty that money or fear could never buy. The kind that survives a federal investigation and the shame of seeing your employers arrested. This time around, you aren't just employees, I said. You're partners. 10% of the equity is being split evenly among you. Equal shares. The room went dead silent. Maria Kellerman froze with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Patricia Hall looked at her husband. Tom Bradshaw slowly nodded his head. We're going to do things the right way, I continued. Vance Legacy Tech is going to be the company Vance Tech never could be. Honest, small-scale, and sustainable. And you all are going to own a piece of it. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, we had taken 3 client calls. They were small contracts, nothing like the multi-hundred-million-dollar semiconductor foundry agreements that used to pile up on my desk. One was a regional distributor needing server rack assembly coordination. One was an export company looking for customs clearance brokerage in the valley, and another was a local manufacturer needing semiconductor logistics consulting. Combined, these accounts would bring in about $400,000 over the next quarter. It was enough to keep the lights on, and enough to pay these 8 people a decent salary. Victor and I sat by the window overlooking the industrial park. A cold December wind was howling down the streets outside. You started with nothing 35 years ago, Victor noted. Just you and a shop foreman job. I watched a truck loaded with servers slowly back into the loading dock, guided by a spotter. I'm a little better off than nothing now. At least I know exactly which mistakes not to repeat. Do you think Claire will ever come back to run the business? I'd thought about it. I wondered if my oldest daughter, alive, vindicated, and finally free of the conspiracy that had consumed her life for 8 months, would ever want anything to do with the family business again. Not this company, I said. She has her own path now. And what about Maya? 15 years at Alderson, 3 minutes of absolute dead silence staring at a phone keypad. Maya had made her choice. Victor didn't push the subject. He knew as well as I did that some doors close and never open again. Starting over at 62 didn't mean starting from scratch. It meant starting over with a body full of scars. By 6 o'clock, the office was empty. Tom Bradshaw was the last to leave, giving me a nod before walking to the elevator. Then it was just me, standing by the window, watching the sun dip below the edge of the valley as the streetlights started to flicker on. I packed some files to take home. I should have left an hour ago, but there was one last thing to do. One more name that hadn't been honored yet. I pulled a document from my briefcase, drafted 3 days ago and reviewed by Victor, just waiting for a signature to become real. The Marcus Reed Memorial Fund, a $500,000 endowment from the restructured company assets, dedicated to an annual scholarship for cybersecurity ethical auditing at Stanford University. On the office wall, a plaque would be mounted to honor the young compliance auditor who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. Marcus Reed. Putting his name somewhere it actually mattered. Finally, I signed my name on the line marked Founder and Trustee. The date, December 18th, 2026. I set the pen down and looked out at the city I'd called home for 62 years. 62 years in this place, and it could still surprise me. The lights of the bay reflected off the dark water, steady and lasting as always, completely indifferent to human ambition and failure. Somewhere out there, Julian was sitting in a cell at Cumberland. In West Virginia, Maya was learning what it felt like to have nothing. And somewhere else, in a place I didn't know, Claire was building a life she didn't have to fake her own death to escape from. And right here on the 6th floor of an ordinary office building in Santa Clara, I was building something that didn't require lies to keep alive. Tomorrow we would start again, smaller, wiser, and cleaner, and Marcus Reed's name would carry real weight. Dawn over the San Francisco Bay looked exactly the way it had 35 years ago, which meant either nothing had changed or everything had completely transformed. I stood by the railing of the waterfront, watching a massive cargo ship glide through the shipping lane with an inevitable slowness. A distant foghorn gave off a heavy, low groan across the water. The cold wind blowing off the Pacific carried the scent of diesel, salt water, and damp concrete. It had been 6 weeks since I signed those documents in that empty office, deciding that small was better. 6 weeks since the morning I thought I was burying my oldest daughter. The bay didn't care about any of it. The ships kept moving, the cranes kept lifting, the dock workers kept laboring on the piers just like they had for 100 years. I pulled my coat tighter against the chill. 62 years old, with a daughter who was alive. A company that was smaller, but completely mine. And Marcus Reed remembered by the world. Some mornings this bay looked like it knew how to forgive. Footsteps sounded on the wooden boardwalk behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew the rhythm. Lighter than Victor's, more deliberate than a tourist's. Claire appeared at the railing next to me, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to me without saying a word. Black, no sugar. Some things never change. You didn't have to come all this way out here, I said. She looked out over the water, her breath fogging up in the cold air. It's been 6 weeks since the press conference. 6 weeks since she had stepped out of witness protection and been vindicated, walking into a world that recognized her face but didn't know her new legal name. She'd cut her hair short, and she was wearing a pair of clear-framed reading glasses, just a prop to disguise herself for an ordinary life. I wanted to see the bay, she said softly. It's been a long time since I watched it move. We stood in silence, drinking the hot, cardboard-tasting coffee. A seagull landed on the railing 10 feet away, staring at the non-existent food in our hands. The foghorn went off again, steady, mechanical, and detached. I thought about the sound at her funeral. I'd stood in the cemetery rain, listening to that exact foghorn in the distance. 6 weeks wasn't enough time to rebuild everything that 8 months of deception had destroyed. But it was enough to start over, enough to share a coffee at dawn, enough to stand side by side, watching ships that didn't care about our drama. Julian's attorney appealed, Claire said, not as a question, but stating a fact like she was talking about the weather. Victor told me, I said. 40 years is 40 years. An appeal won't change anything. What about Maya? I took a heavy gulp of the coffee, tasting the bitterness. I thought about my youngest daughter in her cell at Alderson, learning what it felt like when there was nobody left to call. Maya made her choice. Claire nodded. She didn't argue. She understood that some bridges are burned completely, some family bonds don't survive a conspiracy and attempted murder, and even with your own blood, forgiveness has a limit. A cargo ship drew closer to the shore, its horn blasting much louder than I expected. Claire flinched, then let out a laugh. Genuine, sudden, and completely free. The sound echoed across the water, looking exactly like she had when she was 6 years old, running along these exact piers while I worked overtime. That horn startled me, she said, her voice still carrying that laugh. Your mother used to say the port was too loud for civilized people, I said. The memory came flooding back. 20 years ago, my wife had stood at this exact same railing, shaking her head at the diesel fumes, the crane noise, and the endless racket of the shipping lanes. She'd wanted me to get a quiet, safe office job. Claire's smile softened. Good thing we aren't civilized people. We're just honest people. Honest. The word carried so much weight now. 8 months of lies uncovered. A daughter who faked her death to expose a plot. A son-in-law who murdered a compliance auditor and tried to poison his wife's father. A youngest daughter who traded family for a payout and ended up with 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Honesty had cost us everything, but it had saved what actually mattered. The foghorn blew again. Same sound, different meaning. At her funeral, it had marked an ending. Grief, loss, and the terrible finality of a casket lowering into the cold dirt. Now it marked the passage of time, the arrival of mourning and the slow process of rebuilding trust. one cup of coffee at a time. That foghorn blew on the day of your funeral, I said. Claire stared at the water, looking for the source of the sound far across the bay. I heard it from the FBI safe house, she whispered. I kept thinking about you standing there all by yourself. I wasn't by myself. Victor was there, and you were alive. That was enough. She turned her head to look at me, her eyes that same gray-green color as her mother's, her face carrying scars I would never truly measure. Living under a stolen name for 8 months, gathering evidence while knowing her father was being slowly poisoned, betting everything that the FBI would step in on time. It counted for something, she agreed. We finished our coffees in silence. The cargo ship that had startled her rounded the headland of the bay, disappearing into the open water toward some unknown destination. Below us, the dock workers moved tons of containers with practiced efficiency, making the massive steel boxes look light as air. As I'd spent 35 years of hard work and loyalty building Vance Tech, only to watch it collapse in 8 months, when loyalty was traded for a price tag and hard work became a cover for a conspiracy. Now I'm building Vance Legacy Tech on a completely different set of principles. Smaller, honest, and clean. 8 core employees operating as actual partners, clients who pay a fair price for ethical work, and an endowment to honor the young man who died just trying to do the right thing. At 62 years old, I learned the hardest lesson life has to offer. Some of the things you build, you're just destined to lose. But on certain mornings, just being able to stand here like this is more than enough. The foghorn blew one last time. Claire crushed her empty paper cup and looked over at me. Want to get some breakfast? She asked. There's a diner about 3 blocks up, I said. They have the best hash browns in the entire Bay Area. We turned away from the water together, a father and a daughter rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of truth rather than secrets, moving forward with scars that will never completely heal, but have finally stopped bleeding. The cargo ship disappeared around the headland, and the sound of the foghorn faded into the distance. Claire's hand holding the empty cup was warm, and that was enough. To everyone listening to my story right now, please remember this. Betrayal from your own family always cuts a hell of a lot deeper than a knife from a stranger. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. Those late-night conversations between Julian and Maya that instantly stopped the second I walked into the room. The chilling sympathy on Julian's face when he handed me that bottle of poison, and all those legal documents I signed without bothering to read the fine print. I blindly trusted my family because I assumed blood automatically meant absolute loyalty. Don't make the same mistake I did. Trust is something that has to be earned, not inherited, even when it comes to the people you love the most. The most brutal lesson I learned at 62 is that family betrayal never gives you a heads up. It wears the mask of love while quietly plotting your destruction in the dark. But the truth always finds a way to the surface, no matter how deep it gets buried. Claire showed me that sometimes courage looks exactly like dying and being born again. I believe I was meant to go through this nightmare just to see the difference between biological family and the family defined by truth. Some betrayals are actually blessings in disguise because when everything completely falls apart, you finally see who is truly standing by your side. If you were moved by this story, please drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you ever forgive Maya? Could you bring yourself to trust anyone ever again? Please share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow A Father's Revenge for more stories about truth, justice, and the real price of loyalty. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end. Your time means the world to me. Just as a final reminder, some details in this story have been fictionalized for creative and narrative purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental. But the core lesson here is as real as it gets, and I hope you carry it with you.